I won't say much.
Good.
Okay, is Brad ready? Ready. Okay, it's 7 p.m. I call the City of University Heights City Council meeting to order. Tuesday, September 12th, 2017. The full council is present. And our first order of business is approval of minutes. I'm going to do all three. August 8th meeting, August 21st, special meeting, August 28th, special meeting. Are there any additions or corrections? Hearing none, the minutes are approved by unanimous consent. We have a very full agenda, and I want to keep things moving. And do we have more chairs?
There's more chairs over here.
There's some black chairs there. I want people to be able to sit down, and there's a chair there, chair over there. Okay, One University Place construction reports and updates. Jeff Maxwell's here tonight to speak about the updates. Hi, Jeff.
Very good, thank you. A couple of items. Again, Jeff Maxwell with the development team. Are we on, Michael? Yeah, it's on. Okay. 3 or 4 different items that have come up during the course of operation. First of all, as far as the progress on the second building, we're looking at zeroing in on our occupancy permits November 15th, November 18th, and in that time frame is what we're looking at. There's an awful lot of final preparation that's going on. We're very pleased with the schedules, a bit ahead of schedule, and we're looking forward to that. There are several issues. Number one are exiting issues out of the one-way exit only, which has been a challenge. There's I'd like to ask for permission for one thing tonight, along with this additional signage that Advanced Traffic Control is going to be putting up. They'll be having a no left turn signal as you're going out the exit. Then for the southbound traffic on Sunset, there'll be indication of no right turn. And there's going to be some discussion about the possibility of putting a do not enter on the back side of that signage. It's been brought to my attention that not only do the traffic has occasionally come from the north, made a hard right hairpin turn into the development, which that no do not enter sign would be appropriate. But there's also been, I believe, a contractor related person that was sitting on the south side of Sunset at the stop sign, shot across the intersection, came in on the west side of the median and snuck in that entryway, which, if only our police department were a little bit closer, maybe we'd have a little bit more enforcement of that. But some really foolish things have happened, and if it's on the contracting side, we've communicated that with McComas Lucina to making sure that it's stressed and shared with all of the subcontractors that please follow our signage and our good common sense. So the one thing that I wanted to ask, at the very nose of that island on the left-hand side, as you come to that stop, before you merge into traffic going to the right, we'd like to put a sizable landscaping stone right on the nose of that island. I think to hop the curb, you can see where the tires have damaged the sod right in that area. I think if we were to turn that into just a bit of a feature, maybe draw attention to it, the likelihood of dragging your rocker panel along the edge of that rock might deter some of that. So we've got some of those types of stones that have been used in the lawn area on the east side of the building, a similar type stone. I'd like you to consider giving us permission to try that. It's simply set in that bed. We may try to gussy it up just a little bit. It makes it impossible to mow it that way. So to try to do something in a landscaping bed to make it a bit more maintenance free, but try to discourage any traffic from going through there.
Well,
So
I had asked Josiah to look at that after the special meeting on the 28th, when Jim Lanes had concerns, and the council agreed there were concerns about entry. Josiah, I didn't get to talk to you ahead of this meeting, but did you evaluate that? What do you think of his suggestions for council?
I think I'd like to see it. The only concern with the stone, we just need to make sure we put a large stone in the right of way. It's not in the clear zone where somebody's going to hit it who isn't intending to. So I think if we look at that, we can find a spot for it.
Yeah.
And also for the signage, find the correct spot out there for those signs.
Jake with Advanced Traffic has ordered those signs and is going to bring them out, position them, putting signage on the back side of an existing sign, but it was too much to put all on one signage, so he suggested there are codes that they follow with that, so he's intending to do that. But
Would council be okay with Josiah working with them
Yeah.
Yeah,
when you bring in the signage?
I don't think the stone needs to be, we're talking this size, maybe a 2-foot diameter, so 30 inches perhaps, but it wouldn't be any larger than that.
I'm really glad to see this is getting everybody's attention. This was brought up almost a year ago when some of the neighbors thought that this was going to happen because they saw it happening very soon after the construction. And I think one of the council members raised the issue that it's not a sharp enough turn. And the suggestion was made then to put a big boulder there. And we were told that that might not be, may not be prudent because of the snow removal machines might have a problem with that under certain conditions. But I think it's a great idea. At the time it was brought up, I thought that turn should have been reconstructed to make it sharper and impossible to get into, but it was already done, so that couldn't have been done. But I'm glad to see that it's getting everybody's attention now. Thank you.
You know, if we do consider reconstructing something with the radiuses or the sharpness of those radiuses, we're seeing, again, as soon as we can get rid of the larger trucks, we're seeing the tail end of our longer vehicles, even straight trucks, are bouncing up over the right-hand curb line, and perhaps that could be flared a little bit more gently. So, Josiah, if you and I and Jake with Advance could schedule a time together to spend 20 minutes out there looking at it, I think we come up with some good attempts for our first run, and we'll implement those and then watch it, monitor it, and see if we need to change it after.
Would you guys let me know about that too, so I can come?
Yeah, absolutely.
Any other comments by council, concerns?
I'm fine with that.
Okay.
One other issue that we wanted to discuss, there's been some question about the wood-fired oven out in front of Maggie's, and I think it best probably if I ask Jerry maybe to define the use of that oven. He has permission from the development team to use it. Safety-wise is his utmost concern, of course, and I'll just let him explain the use of that and how that would affect the neighborhood.
I'd like to know what the concerns are, and then I would respond to them.
Well, one of the concerns that I've been expressed to me by several residents is the heat and what, to make sure that people don't touch it if it's unattended at night and those types of things, Jerry. So
Yeah.
I don't know how much it cools down and that sort of stuff.
The surround of the oven will not get above 95 degrees, 100 degrees, maybe. The door of the oven will get very hot. The door of the oven will have a lock on it, so it will not be accessible. If anybody touches the door of the oven, they will be burned, and they will do it once, and our insurance probably will pay for that. But if that is the nature of wood-fired ovens, I imagine there might be a way to put something in the door to ameliorate that heat, at least some insulation or something, and we could look into that. But it's a wood-fired oven. They're used all over the world, all over the country, and it meets all the safety conventions that it needs to meet. That's not to say it's 100% safe to people who want to touch hot metal.
Well, I think if you could look at something for that door, I mean, I went out and looked at it. That's something you can put in front of it, at night. I'm more concerned about people stumbling around at 2 in the morning.
Did any resident is concerned, or Mary?
Well, I just would want to bring up that we've had some pretty strong smoke wafting into our backyard and into our house, and our next door neighbors have noticed too. So we were just going to kind of wait and see if it resolved itself, but it's I mean, I don't know what it does to air quality stacked on top of all the exhaust, but it's more the wood smoke that you can smell pretty strongly that comes into the residential as long as we're talking about it, I don't know if there's some kind of filter that could be put on it, to kind of modify that a little bit. I know that when we had the leaf burning issue, we did have someone who in fact still resides on our street who had a lot of upper respiratory problems, and there was an urgency to ban the leaf burning, and I don't know if the smoke in that amount would cause him undue health issues to the same degree, but.
No, I think that's a very important issue, and it's an issue, it was an issue last week with this oven as opposed to the other oven that's inside. And it's an issue, I think, largely because the load of wood that we got was not as dry as it should have been, so it made more smoke. I just had delivered 2 cords of wood that I think will cut down that markedly. And if it doesn't, we'll take other steps.
I'll stay in touch. I mean,
Yeah.
if we.
Yeah, thank you. No, that's important, and we'll heed that. Thank you.
Oh, I'm sorry, Lisa.
Okay, so I'm not familiar with the oven. I've driven past it, you know, sort of looking, trying not to have an accident when I'm looking. But I did wonder when I went past, is this an oven that's just out there that somebody could burn themselves on? Is it that it has nothing around it that someone could burn themselves on? And the callous response of, if it happens, that'll be the last time and our insurance will pay it is not acceptable.
Well, I was just kidding. We will take every step we can to make it safe. It will have a,
Well, I just wanted you to address, is it open so that that could happen or not?
is the oven opened?
Can someone just go up? Can I just go up and touch it, or is there a protective wall around it?
You could go up and touch the oven and nothing would happen. If you touched the door of the oven when it was closed up, you would know it was hot and you could certainly touch it. We could take steps to put something there to insulate the heat from anybody, so they would have to remove something in order to touch the door. And maybe that's the way to approach this.
I think so.
Yeah. No, I think that's easy enough, and we can certainly do that. And I
Jeff,
was just kidding about the one time, that's all.
Well, that's good to know.
Yeah.
I think everybody's honing in on what is considered to be an attractive nuisance. So does the homeowners association have any guidelines for what attractive nuisances are permitted at One University Place?
To date, there have not been any complaints. Likewise, we are planning a group meeting with not only the residents, but the commercial users as well, to have more discussions. And I think during this creation of the new experience, there's going to be issues that we need to address and discuss. And we, as the developers, and certainly those in the commercial aspect, I think are more than happy to work through these issues as we need to and report back to council. And anyone's public concern, I think all of us are going to have an issue with safety. This concept we're real excited to have here, and I think the neighborhood is excited to have it. We're very excited. So a few of these kind of challenges that we have, I think, are all fixable. They need good attention paid to them. We need to be sensitive to the safety of children, be it either fencing. The fact that it's not a totally new creation in University Heights for the very first time, I think the historical use of these, Jerry will really zoom in on and try to bring us as up to speed from a safety standpoint as we possibly can.
That's true. And we have worked with the developers and the homeowners to, at every step of the way, to do this, and have had the utmost cooperation. And we appreciate that. Thank you.
You know, necessity being the mother of invention, we had some air intake venting that wasn't quite synchronized with pizza oven exhausting. So we've crossed that bridge and learned about it. It was just a matter of slight tweaking. And again, the experiencing things with good concerns brings about the resolution and the successful. Anything further about the ovens? Yes, sir.
Actually, I just want to go back to about people going in the egress.
Sure.
Michael Crocker actually noticed when we put in Maggie's on Google Maps, it was showing to go in through that egress. Michael was for any future businesses or any residences, they should check that. I don't know if that's something, some sort of process that should be in place to make sure that when Google Maps maps an address here or in the rear building, that it goes in the ingress rather than in the egress. It's a quick fix, but it's just something to be aware of for
Not sure how that gets resolved. I'll share that with Kevin and a few other people in our design team that are maybe more familiar with that than I am.
I didn't know, this was like last night or the night before or something. I was curious, but we'd seen so many cars turning around that I punched it into the Google Maps and I showed Colonel Sunset and then turning.
Sometimes we rely on our computers and phones a bit more than we do our common sense, but we'll accept that. So in any event, these are all comments that will help us mold and shape resolutions. So no one takes offense at any of these concerns, and they're all very positive, and we appreciate you doing that. Yes, ma'am.
I just want to say thank you to you for trying to resolve this, and thank you to Jim. I talked to Jim about it, and he got it right to the table as an issue. And even this last night, we saw one car turning in coming this way, and then we saw a car going up Sunset, and they came around Reed and then tried to squeak in that way. So it's happening a lot.
Yeah.
And
I
thank
think
you for
I think the signage should be the first thing, along with the rock, with the council's permission. And if the rock is too much of anything, we'll remove it or resize it. But I think there'll be a real deterrent there. If there's a small stone there that would possibly damage a vehicle, I think it'll stop.
I did have one last question.
Okay.
Once the signage is in place,
It's really hard. I know it's really hard with the recording. We're not hearing any of the questions, and I know it's a huge pain, but it's really hard to have. Got to use the mic. I'm sorry, Mike. And the person who's least suited to adapt to it. Yeah.
sorry, so the only question I had, there was discussion about having the police being aware. So once the signage is in place, is that then an enforceable traffic violation?
Yeah. Yeah.
Jeff, one final question, and it's steering us in a different topic, but can you give us an update on the commercial progress that you're making on the ground floor now that we have the public available and here?
Yeah, we can, first of all, for the amenity, the vacant space directly on the west side of this wall is being converted into the exercise center, which will be for the residents of the community. So that is going to become a part of the homeowners association responsibilities, its maintenance and guidelines and stuff. So that area is being taken care of. There are a number of, and I know this is not a satisfying answer, there are a number of, and some of our original interest levels are still being developed. Costs for build-out are being worked on. We've been asked not to be able to identify any of the upcoming tenants, and we have to honor and respect that. But there's a lot of interest in additional spaces, many of which the community has yearned for and wanted, and those are in the mix, and we're just struggling along with their timeframes, which is not quite as quick as we'd like to see them come to the table, but they're out there and they're working on it, and we'll be happy to share it as soon as we're allowed to.
Can you share the industries involved?
Same ones that we've discussed, some of them.
All right.
One other topic, Judy Joyce with Earthview Environmental has sent a report on the ravine reforestation and its botanical strength. So she's actually here tonight, so she's got a small, short report to make and would be able to answer any questions. Is there anything else that I could help with or answer for anyone?
Thank you for coming,
not,
Jeff,
yes,
because
ma'am.
people have been wanting to get some answers. Thank you.
You can pull it down. That whole, yeah, there you go.
Great, thanks. I'm Judy Joyce with Earthview Environmental. We've been doing the monitoring on the ravine restoration work. And short summary, there's a copy of the report that I sent out. In general, all the trees and shrubs that were planted have been viable. We've been monitoring for weed control, and we were going to do an early mowing this summer, but there were so many flowers that we kind of wanted to wait. We were concerned that if we mowed down the flowers, people would be upset because the interest of providing habitat for pollinators. So we decided to wait till the flowers sort of go dormant, and then we're going to go in and mow at that time. There was questions asked about the tree tubes and the cages around the trees. We're going to keep those up through the winter and then monitor them again in the summer. The tubes themselves help protect those trees from deer browsing. So they're 5 foot tall. Those trees may get above it, but when the deer come in, they'll browse it sometimes down to that tree tube. But that top browsing is actually, the tree can recover from that. The trees are really focusing on root development at this time. So by keeping those tubes up, we can keep it from the deer browsing it all the way to the ground or rubbing up against it. So we like to keep those tubes on even though they come up to the top. And then the cages around the shrubs, again, we're going to keep those just to keep the deer out. You guys know there's a lot of deer around here, so. There was some minor erosion control or some erosion issues on the east side. We quickly notified Jeff. He sent someone out. They diverted some water and put some sod down, so that was very successful. Other than that, everything looks great. I hope you like it. Everything seems to be doing well, so.
I think it's a great job that you did out there. Thank you.
Yeah, Judy, what are the plans for the north side of the back building?
The plans for the north side of the building, is that the area we met? Yeah. So Jeff and I and Kevin met the other day. We're looking at doing some native plantings out there, a little trail system. We don't have the planting plan yet. We're going to see what that final grade is like, but we're really looking for a natural area where people could get out. There'd be a little walking path and they can go through that area. So it would be meadow, like a prairie meadow. Some of it looking with the same sort of plants that you're seeing in the ravine. Some of it might be a little lower areas, so there'll be sort of a transition between the turf and maybe a taller grass, you know, that maybe gets maybe a foot tall, and then beyond that there might be something that's more 3-4 feet tall. Stay tuned.
Yeah,
Sounds
thank you.
wonderful.
Thank you, Judy.
Thanks for the good work.
Yeah,
Appreciate
thank
it.
you.
Okay,
Louise, if I could just
Yes.
say one more thing about that area in the back. It's important to remember that that is the University of Iowa's property. So what our pledge, it was originally the additional parking space, the asphalt parking lot was on university property, then the additional gravel area was also university property. So our promise to them was to reclaim all of the stone, get it back to a normal, natural state, and go ahead and reforest and revegetate it. That's really not taken any shape from a definition standpoint or an approved plan, but Kevin Munson's going to be taking Judy's recommendation and her ideas and suggestions, presenting that to the university, just to get their barometer if we're still okay with that, or if they would rather have a full-fledged plan. I think the intention is to try to turn it back as natural as possible. The trees have been cleared for many years with the church, so for us to get it back to a green state, but we do and want to, Judy is saying that we can mow that grass to maintain a designated walk path. So that'll be there for everyone to be able to enjoy. So all of those plans will be going through David Keft, and they've been so great to work with and such good neighbors that I believe that'll work very well. So.
any other questions for Jeff? Thank you. And Glenn Siders is here, and he submitted his written report. And I don't know if, I mean, no, okay. Yeah, yeah, if there's any questions. Okay, thank you, Glenn. Now, we need to keep this meeting moving. I know that it was important to have Jeff here tonight, and so I let some of the audience speak, but we're going to have to keep on track and keep moving with the meeting. And first will be a public hearing. And I wanted to go over a few ground rules to state your name and address. There's going to be a 5-minute limit, and I ask that you speak only once. Please have respect towards all speakers. No booing, no cheering, clapping, or shouting during the public inputs. And so with that, I open the public hearing on proposed amendments to the city's zoning ordinance number 79 as recommended by the Zoning Commission. The proposed amendments would limit building coverage, the portion of land parcels that may be covered by buildings, to 40%. And then there's 4 additional proposed amendments that are listed on your agenda that you can speak about also tonight. So would anyone like to speak to these? Please come forward to the microphone. Okay, I close the public hearing. And then next, I wanted to speak, I have something else here before.
While you look for that really fast, Louise, just in case, if there's anybody here who hasn't voted in today's school election yet, you have until 8 o'clock to go over to the Hall of Fame. We'll still be here, but by God, if you haven't voted yet in the school election, please go do that. Just,
Okay,
sorry.
We move to the second page of the agenda, and as you can see, there's 5 ordinances to look at. But first, I want to state that in the past few months, I've been asked by several residents about conflict of interest, and I told them that the council will speak when they're voting if they have a conflict of interest. But because we have so many items on the agenda, tonight I want to ask the council right now if there's any votes on the agenda tonight that you would have a conflict of interest.
I don't.
Oh.
I don't.
The, I might be seen as having a conflict of interest on the Marriott. Having the Marriott in place would benefit me, I think, dramatically for the Maggie's Farm Restaurant. However, I'm not going to vote in my interest, so I don't think the conflict is relevant.
I don't have any conflicts.
I may have a conflict on the Sunset bus stop placement if they put it on my property. It's not one of the recommendations
I
at this
see.
time. Those are always moving targets, so.
Chris, will you put that in the minutes, please? Thank you. Can I ask Pat Bauer if he'd summarize the zoning commission's recommendations for council before we start discussion? Thanks, Pat.
So, Pat, where do you want me to start on the documents you sent me?
Our pages.
Yes, I've got it. They are right here.
Can you blow it up a little?
Oh, yeah. Oh, I will. I just, it always defaults to make it
64
small.
pages of ordinances. This represents the culmination of about a year's worth of effort on the part of the zoning commission. I don't think all 5 proposals are equally worthy of consideration and discussion tonight. I think the one that affects everyone in the room is the amendment to the zoning ordinance number 79.
Oh.
And you can see that here in University Heights, we have what are called, thank you, dimensional limitations, that your house has to be 25 feet back from the street. You can't be closer than 5 feet to the neighbors. There's got to be a 30-foot backyard. We also have some maximum height limitations. What we don't have is any building coverage limitation. And as this table indicates, Iowa City has a 45% building coverage limitation. Coralville has a 35% building coverage limitation. University Heights doesn't have any building coverage limitation, and that's been the case since 1980 or 81 when the ordinance was adopted. I'm not sure why that was. If you can move to the next slide. What we tried to do here, we did a survey, an inventory. It's just the next page.
Yep. I'm on freeze.
Of all of the houses in University Heights, 98% of them. And you can see that in terms of what's currently there, this is where houses are, that people have, 20 to, 30% coverage of their lot. Under our zoning ordinances that exist, they could have a much larger buildable area, and that people could have a house that's 2 to 3 times the house that's next to them right now built.
So if you move on to the next page, Mike, we went through and further broke this down by areas of town: Lemur, Olive, first subdivision, second subdivision, Melrose Corridor, and again have, this was all up with the agenda attachments for tonight, but quite a disconnect between what could be built and what's there now. And so moving on to the last one of these four pictures. The zoning commission recommended that we impose a 40% building coverage limitation. Now, there presently is there is no house, no structure in University Heights that would exceed that limitation. But as these numbers show, there could be, absent this limitation, houses that would be much, much larger. So to some extent, we view this as just kind of a corrective measure after whatever it is, 35 years, to put a limitation on building coverage. Over the past 3 or 4 years, the Zoning Commission considered other alternatives, including floor area ratio, which would take into account second stories. It looked at lot coverage that would take into account driveways and patios and sidewalks. As explained in the memo that is in the building attachment, in the meeting attachments, we thought building coverage was kind of a rough approximation of the kind of limitations, such that you know, to avoid the concern where the person next to you built a house that was 2 or 3 times the existing size next to you. Why didn't you guys see that coming? We've tried to see that coming. It's not in the agenda attachments, but it's up in the agenda attachments for the June 20th joint work session between council and the city council. We have a complete inventory of almost every house in University Heights, arrayed by existing building coverage, by buildable percent, and by address. And so you can look up your house and you can see what your house is currently under in terms of its building coverage. And I think for the vast majority of people of town, this 40% coverage limitation would not be a problem. So we saw it as kind of a no-brainer, and it passed the council unanimously. But because it does affect every house in University Heights, the thought was that notice perhaps might be required, but consistent with our commitment to transparency and openness in University Heights, it should be required. So that's the one of the 5 ordinances that's legally required. There are 3 other ordinances that I think are a relatively minor concern. One has to do with subdivisions. It was essentially a loophole blocker that if either the Flom property or the Swisher tract were not to come through the PUD procedure, they could proceed as an R1 subdivision. We didn't have any ordinance in place that would allow the city to regulate that. That ordinance, which is 10 or 15 pages long, imposes those. Another technical correction in connection with that subdivision has to do with the parkland set-aside requirement that was adopted about 2 years ago. And Steve, that was raised last week. I don't know if we talked about the conditional zoning agreement,
right?
Taking that on. I didn't see it in the one that was circulated.
It's not in there, except to say that it can be modified in the development agreement.
Okay.
Or addressed there.
There are 2 remaining ordinances. The first is a stormwater runoff. And this potentially could affect anyone in town who is going to be putting on an addition that would disturb up to 5,000 feet of surface. And I can't imagine that happening. But again, in terms of kind of closing loopholes, closing doors, it changes our existing ordinance, which exempts everything under 1 acre if it's R1, and says, well, even though it's R1, if you're disturbing 5,000 square feet, you need to see the city engineer and to come up with an appropriate proposal to deal with stormwater runoff. The last ordinance is the most complicated, and if you can go forward a page, Mike,
Where do you
is the
want me to
sensitive
zoom
areas
in on
ordinance.
it?
We presently have a sensitive area ordinance that is limited to woodlands, I think of 2 acres, and sensitive slopes. And this is a very, very technical 26-page ordinance, but we have had some maps prepared by a consultant. And so this first map shows the sensitive slopes, the steep slopes that exist in University Heights, primarily in the ravine that we dealt with OUP, up in the Swisher tract, and then a couple of areas around there. Again, there are exceptions in the ordinance that pretty much mean that this would not be a concern to the average existing single-family residence. Next page, Mike. So there are 3 major categories that the sensitive areas ordinance addresses. The first is sensitive slopes, steep slopes. The second are stream corridors and stormwater runoff. And this is a map that shows the areas in town which have stormwater runoff and stream corridors. And again, very, very technical requirements about the slope and how many trees are on the slope, and basically a requirement that if construction development activity was to impact these areas, you need to be submitting a plan for review by the city engineer and the zoning commission. Probably the 2 major areas affected by this would be the Swisher tract and to some lesser extent the Flom property. The other thing, next page, Mike, that it regulates are woodlands. And I think that this is by virtue of canopy. Woodlands, again, these maps are not the controlling. It is the written terms of the ordinance that are controlling. But we took it down from 2 acres to 1/4 of an acre. And these maps are intended to alert property owners to the possibility that you really need to be checking our sensitive areas ordinance to see if it protects the woodlands. Again, there's no absolute prohibition on development of woodlands, but to the extent they can be preserved, they should be preserved. If they can't be preserved, provisions are made for replacement plantings. So those are the kind of the 3 major areas that the sensitive areas ordinance addresses. As I say, sensitive slopes, steep slopes, I suppose I should say, stream corridors, and woodlands. The remaining maps, the 4th one next, Mike, is I think wetlands, just kind of informational, letting people know that these aerial surveys show that there could be some areas, low-lying areas, excuse me, that you might want to be mindful as you work around your property. I think the next one is, this one is complicated. It's an algorithm, if you know what those are these days. But this is the consultant who put together an algorithm of sensitive areas. And basically, as it gets darker, there are more and more factors that you should be mindful of if you're contemplating significant development activity in that area. And then the last 2 maps they're kind of the 2 sides of the same coin, so I think we can just look at the first one. Pervious areas. This shows, based on an aerial survey, kind of where are the areas of town where there's a lot of grass, where stormwater can kind of drop in, versus where are there areas where there's a lot of pavement and parking, such that if you have heavy rainfall, you'll have a lot of stormwater runoff. The next map, which we needn't look at, is simply the other side, which is impervious surface or pervious surfaces. Impervious surface. So these were included. The city council, we spent about $1,800 getting these maps developed by their consultant. And even though the ordinance doesn't regulate them, we thought that citizens might want to be aware of the existence of these conditions. So, as I say, we got a lot on the agenda tonight. I don't know how deep into the weeds anyone wants to go on this. I'm prepared to go deep into the weeds, as I always am.
It's his favorite.
But I would assure both members of the council and members of the public that I'd be happy to speak with you outside the confines of a formal council meeting about any concerns you might have about the requirements of any of these 5 ordinances. As I say, they come to the council, having been unanimously recommended by all 5 members of the zoning commission, which I think brought to the table a range of viewpoints initially, but came to consensus. We had an hour-long work session with the city council back in June where we walked through these. An audio recording of that meeting is available, as are on the city's website. Mike has put links between these ordinances and the agenda attachments for that meeting, as well as the audio recording, which has time stamps on it so that you could go to that portion of it.
Are there any questions? Thank you so much for going
Yeah.
through that
And I would-
detail. I appreciate it.
I'll leave you with the last thought, which is I said to the council back in June, you know, it's easy for important things to be pressed aside because of urgent things. The zoning commission thinks this is an important thing, and we realize there are other urgent matters demanding your attention. But the council did commit in June to going forward with these initiatives now, and we very much appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you, and we really appreciate all the work of the zoning commission on this. I know it's been over a year worth of work, too. So we have first consideration of ordinance number 209, amending the zoning ordinance 79.
I move adoption of ordinance 209.
Motion by Mike,
Second.
second by Jim. Discussion. Roll call vote.
Haverkamp.
Aye.
Maher. Lane.
Aye.
Casada.
Abstain?
Zimmerman.
Abstain.
3-2. Carried.
Okay, then we have first consideration of ordinance number 210, regulating and adopting requirements, restrictions, and procedures for subdivisions of land. Is there a motion?
Move adoption of ordinance 210.
Second.
Motion by Mike, second by Jim. Discussion by council.
I'd like to know the operation of how the subdivision operation would work. For example, Chairman Bauer talked about a loophole blocker. I'd like to know what scenario or hypothetical he was referencing that he was concerned about. So I'd like to hear from councilors what that might mean, or maybe even from Chairman Bauer.
Okay. Subdivision would apply when there's no rezoning. Right now, we have 3+ acres that's R1 residential, the Flom property. In order to develop that as a Marriott hotel, they need to come and request a rezoning, and that rezoning is being channeled through the PUD process that allows the council to control various details of that. As an alternative, the owner of that parcel could simply file a subdivision plat and divide it into, consistent with our zoning ordinance, I think maybe 17 or 18 residential R1 houses. In the absence of an ordinance, state law imposes some requirements, but those state law requirements are not necessarily as mindful of land use considerations. Streets, sewers, parkland, things like that. And so all that this ordinance does is assure the city, in the event that someone were to proceed by a subdivision rather than rezoning, would have to go to the city and in effect be subjected to the same kind of close scrutiny that the city presumably would wish to apply in the circumstances of a rezoning.
And what type of controls does the city have if half of the train is already departing through the process of a subdivision?
It's built into the subdivision.
Can the city withhold subdivision
Yes, yeah.
authorization?
Yeah, and so there again, it's 15 pages long, but specifications of the criteria to which a subdivision would be held, and in the judgment of the council, see if it was appropriately being divided up in a way that didn't create problems down the line.
Steve, I'd like to ask you, since you assisted in the drafting of this subdivision, if the city has any ability, in addition to the listed categories for which they can withhold consent to allow a subdivision plat to go through, what else does the city have that's not extraordinary to meet? Is it a low threshold for the city to argue against a subdivision? Or is it a pretty high threshold that the city has to work in order to in order to deny subdivision plating?
Yeah,
And that would be in your legal opinion, please.
sure, that's the only one I have. And I'm happy to provide it. It's a high threshold for the city, to use your question, for the city to say, for example, to the Swisher Tract, no, we won't let you cut this up into lots and sell them and develop it, even though our ordinance, our zoning ordinance says you can, because it says lots have to be a certain size. So without an ordinance like this, it's a very high threshold. Now, the zoning ordinance isn't the only one that would come into play when you talk about something like the Swisher Tract. Sure, there is a sensitive areas ordinance, so the
Right.
council might have something to say on that angle. But just in terms of taking a tract of land and wanting to, divide it and market it, it's a high threshold for the council to have much to say about that in the absence of an ordinance like this. It's also a fairly rare circumstance in University Heights, as Pat said. I mean, as you know, there aren't very many chunks of land that aren't already developed.
That's right. That's right. How often do municipalities overturn a proposed subdivision proposal?
So, assuming that we're not talking about a rezoning, that's where municipalities and county governments most often say, no, or only if. I think it'd be pretty rare that a municipality would just flat out say you can't do it. I mean, a municipality might well say we want you to put the roads here, or make them this wide, or here's what you have to do to provide sanitary and storm sewer sidewalks and those are all very common.
So really the city is really limited to the type of authority it has once this plating has gone through. We're really left with only telling people where roads, sidewalks, and sewer lines should go. That's really what we're left with in terms of control over a parcel of land.
Well, kind of. I mean, with regard to the subdivision, but the zoning ordinance has all sorts of things to say about control over.
Sure,
a
but you've got
parcel.
sensitive slopes, I get that. We have runoff ordinances. I've got to
Setbacks
share.
and,
Right.
building coverage if this is adopted and other
Sure.
things like that.
I'd like to share with my fellow counselors here at the table that my concern over this subdivision, I think it's a good idea. It's a solid idea. However, with respect to the Swisher Tract, which is 10 and a half acres of undeveloped land, I think we would be expediting or allowing the tract to become available for subdivision and leaving the city with not as much control as you would outside of a subdivision structure. So I'd like for all of you to consider that the Swisher Tract has barely become an active parcel of property within our community. It's under new trustee management. This trustee management group is much more receptive to at least their mail, because the prior trustee didn't respond or communicate with anyone, irrespective of what you used to contact them. So my point being that I think we need to think carefully as a council with the future that is barely available because of this new change of management with that trust who is controlling 10 and a half acres of undeveloped land in University. I will be discussing conservation efforts later in the agenda, and I would appreciate as a courtesy if any of you would withhold voting on this measure until after that topic of conservation is discussed. If you're all amenable to that, I would be grateful for your support on that.
Pat, you wanted to
I just
comment?
wanted to disagree with Councilor Caseta. The right of a landowner to subdivide the property is currently prescribed by state law. Those requirements are much less than the requirements that we are adding on by virtue of passing this ordinance. I think it would be kind of quite clear that the ability of an owner to subdivide their property under state law would involve much greater latitude than would be the case should there be an ordinance in place in which the municipality is exercising its control to add on additional. This is not authorizing. This is adding on an extra layer of primarily land use control that is not is not as well developed under state law as it is under the provisions of this ordinance.
Are there any questions for Pat? Okay. Thank you, Pat. What does council want to do? They want to defer this until after the discussion of the conservation, or?
I think if the premise is not correct, then I don't see why there's a need to defer it.
Do you still see a need to?
I would like to hear from the other counselors, sure.
I'm not going to jump in and say anything if Jim looks like he was going to talk, but okay.
Go ahead.
I have no strong feelings one way or another when we consider this. I mean, we can hold this one and prove the other ones, but talk about it. You're talking about it later tonight yet, Sylvia?
I guess, well, if you're all ready to vote in favor of it, which is what I'm speculating might be the consensus, why delay the vote?
I guess I was glad that Pat stepped up, because what he said is what I see in reading that ordinance, that these are things on top of what's already the state law. So I don't see a problem with that.
That was my observation too.
Well, this is first consideration, Sylvia,
Mm-hmm.
and I think we could
All right.
go
Absolutely.
into more detail, perhaps. I mean, perhaps you and Pat can talk, and if there's any particular. Thank you. I think this is the first consideration, and we have to do 3 of these, and so I'm tending to want to approve this, and then if it needs to be more discussion on the second
Sure.
consideration, then we can do that.
Absolutely. Right.
Okay.
And I say that only because we've had ordinances that start off being approved
Right.
and later defeated. So, all right.
Okay. Roll call vote.
Maher. Lane.
Aye.
Casada.
No.
Zimmerman.
Aye.
Haverkamp.
Aye.
Carried.
Okay, we have first consideration of ordinance number 211, which requires parkland dedication when certain development occurs, to not require a separate development plan or plot where parkland dedication is shown in subdivision plots to be approved by the city council.
I move adoption of ordinance 211. I'm going to roll.
Okay, motion by Mike,
I'll second.
second by Jim. Council discussion. Roll call vote.
Lane.
Aye.
Casada.
Aye.
Zimmerman.
Aye.
Haverkamp.
Aye.
Maher. Carried.
First consideration of ordinance number 212, regulating development of properties containing environmentally sensitive areas. Is there a motion?
I motion adoption.
Motion by Sylvia, second by Dottie. Discussion?
I just want to thank the Zoning Commission for bringing ordinance number 212 forward, because the genesis of this was really the Kinnick Stadium that would have arrived within our neighborhoods in terms of sensitive slopes. So I do want to thank their good work for culminating in this work product for us to vote on tonight. So I motion adoption.
Okay. Is there any other discussion? Roll call vote.
Casada.
Aye.
Zimmerman.
Aye.
Haverkamp.
Aye.
Maher. Lane.
Aye.
Carried.
Okay, first consideration of ordinance number 213, amending ordinance number 169, which regulates post-construction stormwater runoff to broaden the applicability of those regulations, which now apply only to developments that include disturbing land that is 1 acre or greater in size. Is there a motion?
I move to approve.
Motion by Dottie,
Second.
second by Sylvia. Discussion? Roll call vote.
Zimmerman.
Aye.
Haverkamp.
Aye.
Maher. Lane.
Aye.
Casada.
Aye.
Carried.
Okay, thank you. We'll go on to consideration of resolution number 1735, and this is the conditional zoning agreement imposing additional conditions as part of the rezoning of property known locally as 901 Melrose Avenue, a portion of 905 Melrose Avenue, and 909 Melrose Avenue by amending these ordinance number 79 to create a CH commercial hotel zone that would establish a procedure for the property to be redeveloped as redeveloped a hotel. Steve, did you want to start out with, you got the last edition, what was it, version 8?
11.
Plus 11?
I move adoption of Resolution 1735.
I second.
Okay, motion by Mike, second by Sylvia for Resolution 1735. And I just thought you might want to review it. Thank you.
Sure.
I've got the red line up, Steve.
Oh, yeah. Well, the red line's.
You want the clean one?
For a while. No, I don't. That's fine. Yeah. So the process, first off, as I've said before, Iowa law provides that in addition to rezoning properties, City Council may enter into agreements with the proposed developer that could apply some additional conditions with respect to rezoning or development. That's what's commonly known as a conditional zoning agreement. And so since mid-August, I think, there's been discussion, I guess it came up at the August 21st special meeting. There's been discussion with the developers about conditions that might be applied to the rezoning in this instance if the council is inclined to rezone. So what the council has before it in terms of this resolution 1735 is a conditional zoning agreement. It's entered into by the city on the one hand and the developer and all the property owners on the other. I'm not going to go through every detail, but I'll certainly answer any questions that you have. I think the gist of it is in paragraph 7, which is on page 4, and it says that first off, that development will conform to the city's ordinances, which isn't a big surprise or addition. Secondly, it says that the development will comply with, through a PUD development agreement, the ordinances that the council just adopted for the first reading. You know, those ordinances aren't law in the city yet, but it wasn't the joint meeting. At a prior meeting in August, the developers were asked whether they would meet the intention or the spirit of the ordinances under consideration, and they said by all means. The council has the right to enforce that under the terms of this agreement and under the terms of a development agreement, which would be part of development under the zoning ordinance, again, if the council adopts it. The next part of this CZA says that the developer won't challenge the city's ability to impose these regulations and then impose further regulations through the PUD process. And then paragraph D, so I'm at the bottom of page 4, says that to further the city's goals and efforts toward neighborhood stabilization, that the developer would agree to convey to an entity or organization specified by the city 2 properties, either 2 properties on Olive Court or 1 on Olive Court and then 905 Melrose, which is called out by address because the developers already own that property. So it's an effort to say to the developers, we want you to convey to some entity, and that entity hasn't been identified. It would be identified by the council, not the developer. And I think the vision is that then that entity, whether it's something like the university type program that's being operated in Iowa City, or various other programs that exist with the Iowa City Housing Authority, or...
If I can interrupt, okay? You as the attorney are making the case for something that it's not in your purview to make. If a counselor wants to make this case, I could understand it. But you're explaining how the council might see this as, and it looks like, in an advocacy position. And I don't think that's your role. counselor wants to talk about these things as such, let them do it. But
Sure.
having you advocate for it, I think it's not appropriate.
So my intention is to explain the genesis of what I understood to be from what people told me the intent.
Actually, Steve, I think we can take it over from here as council. Thank you.
Sure.
Not to diminish your capability of explaining this
And I
document.
love you dearly, Steve.
All right. This is the conditional zoning agreement that was entered into with the development group. Let's go over the highlights, some of which have been provided in an orderly fashion by legal. But I'm going to go through milestones because I think that's what people care about. I know that's what I cared about with this conditional zoning agreement. Number one, financials for the development team will be disclosed. There's no delay. There's no putzing around. Those will be provided, and those will be provided within 7 days of execution of this agreement. There is no TIF involved in this transaction whatsoever. Any taxes that are generated on the property will be returned to the People's Treasury. That's the University Heights City Treasury. The historical Flom House property has been conveyed to the city with time enough for us as a community to work together to resolve what we're going to do with this historical house that was of significant importance to everyone involved. More importantly, we also have the agreement in writing that there will be no further expansion of this development team west of the property line around Olive and Lemur for purposes of ancillary hotel uses. They are in the business of staying in the corner of University Heights map next to the railroad tracks, and that's what they're going to do. They're going to run a hotel according to the representations made to the city. Additionally, they agreed to to transfer 2 houses that are being converted from short-term rentals, knocking down that percentage in that corridor to an increased percentage of owner-occupied pursuant to the conditions of Attachment 1. So in terms of what this conditional zoning agreement it represents some of the key milestones that the Zoning Commission identified in closing and in their memorandum and presentation to the City Council after they arrived at their vote. Chairman Pat Bauer made it very clear that this was an opportunity for Council to take measures to address, and I believe that the consensus of this council is well reflected in this CZA, which is short for Conditional Zoning Agreement. I personally believe that it is protective of our community. It places the right responsibility of a developer who knows his place and has to work as a good neighbor towards our folks that are closest to the property line and those that remain throughout the rest of the 14 and 13 streets of our city, because we only have 15 streets in University Heights. And those are highlights of this agreement. Are there any questions from peer counselors here, or any discussions?
I'm not sure why this is taken up before the vote on the ordinance, the rezoning ordinance itself. This presupposes a positive vote, and it is the proverbial nose under the tent. I think the council would show more respect for the residents who are here who want to voice opposition to it if they didn't do something which presupposes the passage of an ordinance that hasn't even been voted on the second time.
We were directed by city attorney.
That I can't answer. So the code requires that if the council is to adopt or wishes to adopt a conditional zoning agreement, it has to do that before the hearing that's scheduled on the agenda on the rezoning. So the code requires that. Nothing that requires the council to vote one way, or the other on either measure.
But it didn't occur before the first vote.
No, so what the what 414.5 of the code says is that to change the zoning ordinance, the council has to have a public hearing, which is what the council had just a few minutes ago on the building coverage zoning change. The code doesn't prevent the council from having multiple public hearings. So the council had a public hearing with respect to what I'm calling Ordinance 208 to rezone the Flom property at its August meeting, and then went ahead and had a vote on that rezoning ordinance, and then scheduled a second hearing tonight and a second vote. If the council wants to have a conditional zoning agreement, that agreement has to be entered into before the time of that hearing. That's what the code says.
Okay,
So if the CZA had been under discussion in June or July, it may have come up in August. It wasn't.
does it have to vote on that now, or does it just have to have the public hearing on it?
So the code requires that the agreement be entered into. So that means the council has to approve it, and it has to be, signed and sealed by everybody involved before the public hearing on the zoning change.
What am I missing, that if you don't know what the specifics are of the zoning change, and we don't, how could we know what that conditional zoning letter should say?
I don't want to say you're missing anything. The specifics of the zoning change, have been publicized for over a month. I mean, the zoning ordinance is there. Right. Yeah.
But it hasn't been, again, I think it just presupposes a positive vote on the ordinance as it is written. So it locks in a conditional zoning letter, which, and the terms of which presuppose the passage of that ordinance as it's written. And I think it's in disrespect for those residents who are opposed to it and want to be heard before any conditional zoning letter is generated.
So again, from my standpoint, the legal requirements the legal requirements dictate the sequence. The agreement itself says that it has no effect unless and until the zoning is changed.
Well,
So it's not locked in that sense.
I would ask the council to, out of deference and respect for the residents who are here, who don't want to see anything presupposed before they're heard, and is to table this until the next meeting and have another public hearing about it, and first hear the residents this evening.
What would council want to do?
I'm happy following legal's advice and voting on this first.
Okay. Is there further discussion on it? No?
Well, I think it's a good, the conditions that we're going under were things that folks came, as Sylvia pointed out, came out of the building and zoning. This extended stay stuff is gone, so there's none of that's going to happen. I think what's extremely innovative on this thing is this, getting the developer to convey to city 2 properties so that we can begin the
Revitalization.
of the neighborhoods, which we had, we got we have 5% of the rebate coming into the city over the next 10 years from the OUP, which was to be spent on revitalization and those types of things. So this kind of kickstarts this process, and we don't have to put the capital out to buy at least these first 2 buildings. It really helps quite a bit, and probably it speeds this up by several years.
Now,
And we also are preserving the house and giving that to the city to decide how to use it or place it. So I think most of the queries and conditions have been met.
I will, it's hard for me to understand how Jim, who has substantial financial background, can say how much this is going to help without having the purview of a plan to revitalize, this might be an insignificant amount, and it probably is. There's been no long-term plan up until now, and this is, is it innovative or is it pay to play? I don't know, but I don't think it amounts to a hill of beans relative to what the city is going to need for the kind of revitalization project that people are talking about now.
Any other discussion?
I'm comfortable with following a legal direction.
Okay. Consideration of resolution number 1735 is before you. Roll call vote.
Haverkamp.
Aye.
Maher.
Aye.
Lane.
Aye.
Casada.
Aye.
Zimmerman.
No, because I think it ought to follow the vote on the ordinance rather than precede it.
Carried.
Okay. Now we have the public, I'm going to call the public hearing to order on proposed amendments to the city zoning ordinance. And here you can speak about the conditional zoning agreement. You can speak about the hotel. And I ask that you come to the microphone and speak no longer than 5 minutes. So who would like to start?
We do have a list.
Oh, we have a list. Should I follow it the way it's listed? Linda Levy. Levy?
Oh, no.
I've been your neighbor over here off of Melrose Avenue on McBride for 40 years. And I'm going to continue to be your neighbor, even though I'm moving a little bit to Lytham Condominiums. And so I'm going to be a 131st, be a fractional member of that condominium association. As I listen to this isn't why I came, but it sounds like we're going to have an interesting homeowners association with part of the association in University Heights and part of the association in Iowa City.
I think all of that development's in Iowa City. That entire development's in Iowa City. You can only get to it through University Heights, but
Okay. Well,
you're
okay.
off the hook.
Okay, so I went to look at my wow. I was just like, oh my God. Thank you. I was driving to see the condo. I'm supposed to take possession in a month. And I drove down Lemur to look, and on Friday, just before I got to cross the line into, where am I? Iowa City?
Into Iowa City,
Just
right.
before I crossed the line into Iowa City, which is, I am the first property on the east side of Lemur Court. There are 5 porta potties lined up against the fence. And so I was a little bit disturbed, as you can imagine, having my family coming next week to line up and see that their mother has just spent the family fortune on a residence that's going to be next to a toilet. So I called.
I think that's on the Iowa City property.
It's not.
No,
It's
University Heights.
It's University Heights.
It's
We
University Heights there.
It's 30 Lemur.
yeah, it's right on the edge.
30
there.
Lemur.
It's the
Okay,
first
I'm on the
house.
wrong street.
First
Okay.
house.
Okay, so I didn't know what the ordinance was in University Heights for porta potties, but I have talked to some people, and I've learned that, and from reading in here, that they are not supposed to be visible from the city street. Well, they are very visible. They're lined up right on the fence, and I have pictures of it to show you if you want to see them. And I understand that they are not supposed to be there that many days ahead of the first home football, the football game, which is next week. They've had them there since Friday. They're not covered. They're completely visible. And this is a very small house if you drive by there. The property is very small. How many how many porta potties, how many guests will that accommodate? Why do they need 5? I don't know what your ordinance is on. Is there a limit on the number of porta potties that you can have?
It's so we haven't really enforced this before, and they've received 2 letters, and this Friday is the last day they have to take care of it. So we'll be visiting with them if it's not taken care of by.
It wasn't taken care of today when I went by.
I understand, but we
Yeah.
gave them until Friday to take care of it. So
Okay. So what does that mean, take care of? Put covers over it?
they can either it's either not visible from the road or taken out. They're allowed to be there from the first home game until the Thursday before the first home game until the Sunday after the last home game of the year. So they don't have to be taken out between each game, but they do have to be covered or not visible from the road. So
Okay, so you were concerned about the smoke from that lovely barbecue, wood-burning pizza place wafting across the street. I'm 5 feet from that fence, and I am very concerned about having 5 porta potties, even if they're covered, across the, right next to me for that period of time. So I just want to express that to you and ask you to be a good neighbor, as we have been in Iowa City for all these years.
Linda, we're going to discuss
Tell-
this later on the agenda. We're going to discuss this, and I mistakenly took, had you speak from this list where you signed up, but actually right now we're having a public hearing on
Gotcha.
the hotel and the conditional zoning. It's my fault that I called your name from this list. I
Oh.
won't call any more names from that list. I'll just
Okay.
ask people, but thank you.
Okay, so I don't have to wait. I'm
No.
just gonna.
Well, we're
Yeah.
going to talk about it later on.
Okay, so.
I mean, I could call you and let you know how it turned
I
out.
just wanted to make you aware of it. I wanted to see you
Sure.
face to
Sure.
face, and I
Sure.
didn't know I was coming into such a
Sure.
landmine.
Thank you.
be lucky you're on the
Thank
other
you.
side. I can also tell you that, Mrs. Levy, having a property right behind me who parks about 40 cars, it is a big empty field, you want the porta potties there because the alternative is
Okay.
worse.
I understand that.
yeah,
But
yeah.
I don't know how
Yeah,
this house can't park 2 cars.
right.
there was
Okay,
a rather large issue going on at that house that's not happening anymore. So I don't think you'll have to worry about it. It'll be taken care of.
Well, it's also a concern, given that the new state law for allowing so many unrelated people in rental property, and there's that that's a rental property.
Right.
Yes.
It wasn't
I
people
don't know
living
how
there that
much
was the
more of
issue.
your city is going to turn into rental
right.
property, but it's a concern.
Thank you. Yeah. Thank you
Okay.
so much. So we'll continue with the public hearing on the conditional zoning agreement and the hotel. And I'm not going to look at this list, so you're going to have to raise your hand if you want to speak.
Alice is over here.
Alice. Oh, thank you.
Alice Haugen, 1483 Grand Avenue. I've tried to think of any decision you make as a council that is more important than rezoning. If you set a speed limit too low, you can raise it later on. If you decide that you can defer repavement on a street and that winter it develops potholes, you can call in someone to put in some patchwork. Once you rezone something, it will not go back. A rezoning decision is the most weighty one you make, and it permanently changes the city. And so it's reasonable to ask before a rezoning decision is taken is this decision needed? Is it needed? Is it necessary in any way for us to make this change? And I'm struck by this motel rezoning that it's not needed. Iowa City and Cornwallville are well supplied with hotels, and they're going to have 30% more in the near term, so we don't need more hotel rooms. It's not like the situation in 2008-9 when there was a major recession going on. The city is in good financial shape. We don't need it for income to the city. I've been trying to find any dimension in which we need this rezoning to be done, and I haven't found one. And it will permanently change the city. You'll hear from other people, I'm sure tonight, many of the reasons not to do the rezoning. But I want you to think of it this way. I don't see any reason to rezone it. And since it will permanently change the city, I ask you to vote against it.
Thank you. Would anyone else like to speak? Mary?
Is this okay? Can you hear me? Okay. My name is Mary Matthew Wilson. I live
You need to pull up just a little bit closer, Mary. You can tip it up. It should, the whole arm.
This arm? Nope. Oh, that arm. Okay, got it. Mary Matthew Wilson, 308 Koser Avenue. I have come before this council in the past to ask you to listen to me about various matters. Tonight, I come before you to ask you to listen to your own conscience. You have heard and will continue to hear many people speak out either against or for the proposed rezoning of the Flom property to accommodate a Marriott hotel. Our citizens have spoken to you in meetings, over email, perhaps in private conversation, and probably even in posted letters delivered to your door. As you know, I stand with those who are requesting that you slow down and not make hasty decisions that could impact negatively our quality of life in University Heights. We tout our community as the height of good living, and I have come to discover that that means different things to different people. For some, it means having money and things. For others, it means having contentment and peace, and forging strong ties and relationships with others in the community. I can tell you, as someone who lives every day with a huge development looming over my backyard fence, along with the noise and the smells that come with it, that it has taken me a while to find my peace and contentment again. I have done so largely because the deed is done, and there is no use in railing against it any longer, even though there are stark reminders every day. That would be pure folly. I have learned to live with it and focus on the positives. One positive in my mind is now that there is a locally owned restaurant business that will bring people together over good food and conversation. Another positive is that I may meet some new neighbors moving into OUP who possibly will enrich my life simply by our greeting one another and talking about our dogs or the weather as we walk about this walkable community. Perhaps deeper friendships will form over time. Friendliness and friendships are the treasures of life. My joy is the people who live in University Heights and consider it a special place to spend a part or all of their lives. I have heard members of council remark how special University Heights is and how we need to preserve that sense of pride and uniqueness. I genuinely feel that allowing a hotel to sprout on the east side of University Heights will jeopardize the charm and character of our town. It is a very dull and unimaginative use of a very special piece of land, which is a unique part of our community. Many nearby neighbors will lose the quality of life that caused them to move to our community and put down roots. I am hoping that you will do some soul searching and ask yourselves if this is really the legacy you want, to sell our precious community out to a corporate interest that is only interested in making money. I hope you are not so fixated on the idea of making money that you would trade the peace and contentment of your neighbors for it. Please open your heart and your awareness and listen to your own conscience. Let peace prevail in University Heights. Thank you.
Thank you. Larry?
Larry Wilson, 308 Koser Avenue. I've spoken in the past how I think there's too much disparity in the height and mass of the hotel versus the single-family residences, one-story single-family residences, only 50 feet away to their yard and 90 feet to their back door is just too great. I've said enough of this, I think, so I won't go through it all again. But I have a couple other things I'd like to hit upon. It's not clear to me in this CZA what is said about the Flom property. What's in, what was in. I couldn't read it because of the post. By the way, it'd be awful handy to have a nice little screen up here so those behind the post can join in the meeting. Anyway, in looking at the developer agreement, there's no mention of the bike trail, which we've all said should be somewhere, whether it's in the current location or perhaps rerouted for some reason. That should be in there. And there's no mention, I believe, at least there isn't in the development agreement proposal, about the Flom house. And I think the council should slow down the approval process to work with the hotel developer to determine a location for the Flom house. I think the developer needs to take greater responsibility for this and not foster it off on the University Heights community and have to pay for the moving and relocation, rehabilitation, or whatever's done with it. That is the responsibility of the development. I've thought of one possible location for the house, and that could be the east side of Olive Court at Melrose. And my understanding is that the developer already has options to buy the 905 Melrose property and the 909 Melrose property, where he plans to demolish the house on the 909 property. And then the 16 Olive Court property immediately adjacent to the south is a rental property, and I think it's something that could be purchased by the by the developer or the city or a combination of both, and to bring it into play. I believe there would be room for the Flom house on the combined 905 Melrose and 16 Olive Court lots. A partnership of UH, the developer, and perhaps Habitat for Humanity might remodel a house for use as similar to Iowa City University project, and remodel it for single-family use that would be owner-occupied in that location. It could be the beginning of returning a single-family use to the existing homes along the east side of Olive Court, or possibly redevelopment of that area to a use such as duplexes or townhouses that would be highly residential in character, but would also help buffer the hotel if it's built better for those people on the west side of Olive Court. The combined 905 Melrose and 16 Olive Court location would be a place where a two-story house of historical significance could be a better buffer to the hotel and be also in a bit more visible for the UH community than in some other location. Another option would be for the University Heights to find the resources for the house could be repurposed as a museum, perhaps combined with a commercial use such as antique or curio shop, or as a professional office. Otherwise, it would seem to be at least a fairly decent location for an owner-occupied home to what was previously a site for an owner-occupied home. So it's returning to its currently existing use and saving a historic building at the same time and providing an entrance landmark for the University Heights community. Perhaps an outdoor garden with sign stations interpreting the UH history could be a part of it. It could draw visitors as well, have some importance in another dimension. The use would not only provide an interesting and historic entrance to UH from the east, but also provide an entrance to the hotel site and somewhat ameliorate the commercial nature of the hotel itself. So the hotel would be making a residential statement, at least, at the entrance to the hotel. So I highly urge you to slow down the process of approving this proposal until you can iron out some of these very, very important elements of the development. Thank you.
Thank you. Would anyone else like to speak? David?
David Giese, 1138 Melrose Avenue in University Heights. I got one question real quick for legal. If the Fromm property was moved from one location to another location, would it have to be upgraded to current city codes?
If the house is moved, no.
Okay.
I mean, if it was to be like a rental home, then yes, it would have to meet code before it could get a rental permit. But if it was to be
If it was to be changed back over into a single-family housing, would it have to be updated as far as wiring and other codes?
Yeah, I don't think so. I mean, I guess I'd have to check with our building official, but I don't think so.
Okay.
Am I wrong, Jim? Okay, I'm wrong.
Dangerous.
So that was just one question that I was throwing out there. Go into detail a little bit about this as far as my history with University Heights and where I see the future of University Heights going. I did a little bit of talking with Paul Moore about parking. I'm not sure if the council can picture what I was talking about when I was talking about making Olive Court one-way heading south. It would give more room for the traffic flow and keep the handicap parking on Melrose for Paul's building to be ADA compatible without having to go into the back parking lot where it's steeper. Olive Court right now is 18 feet wide. Fire trucks are 10 feet wide, give 3 foot on either side for clearance. It takes up 16 feet. You do the math, there's not enough room for 2 vehicles left on that. So if a person was redoing some streets, this would be something that could be addressed. I know people have asked before about removing trees, and that's not in the best interest of anybody that owns any of the properties there or wants to do that. I also want to go on record that I'm in favor of the Marriott Hotel. People said that it could change the tailgating experience that the city is known for. That has gone through a lot of changes over the past years when the University of Iowa stopped allowing fans from Kinnick to exit at halftime, blocking Melrose intersection at Kosher during the halftime of the game was one obstacle that got overseen. Then the university stopped allowing alcohol on their properties and it shifted it over to the neutral track. At that point, they started charging people to walk into the property also for tailgating on that part. They were charging money for people to walk in at $5 per head, and they were making more money off of people walking in than they were off the 800 cars that they were parking on occasion. You can do the math on that. As that went by the wayside, tailgating in University Heights has changed again. If our previous council members had been more forward-thinking back in the day, they would have annexed in more property for the city to grow. Now jump to the mid-70s when I moved into University Heights. Iowa City tried to give the neutral track to the city of University Heights to annex in because they did not have any roads leading into that property. Which would have been another 10 acres for the city of University Heights to do something with. At that point in time, the council people said that that the neutral track was not of a concern to them, and why would they want that headache? And it was not annexed in, and the city is left playing the cards that have dealt to them on that part of it. George Nagel back in the day did a great job building his apartments almost to the point of a fallout shelter, the concrete that was used, and back in the day that's pretty darn close. It was not being cost effective to keep them up any longer after the city passed the development to build a modern day retirement housing project. That stopped after passing on one of the developers to build the new modern-day retirement housing. The project stopped. Ironically, our city helped Oakno with their financing for the third time to allow them to build condos that the development would have built in our retirement community.
David, I hate to interrupt, but we are talking about the hotel now. Could I let you go? Can I let you talk? Your 5 minutes are up. Can I let you talk during, you have some hotel things to say there? Okay. Could you settle it up in about 30 seconds? Can you? I mean, I have a 5-minute limit.
Sure. That's fine.
Thank you.
Give you 2 more seconds here.
Okay.
I'm the second generation in University Heights. I raised my family here. Part of my family, Deputy Sheriff Kendall Giese, lives across the street from my house. He's the 3rd generation of our family that's lived in University Heights, and we think it would be the best interest for the city and our long-term vision to go ahead and adopt this hotel policy.
Thank you, David. Would anyone else like to speak? Okay.
Hello, I'm Marshall Bridges. I live at 1440 Grand Avenue. I just have 3 simple points for you guys. I guess we have a lot of people to talk. First of all, we just don't need this hotel, right? I just submit simply we didn't need the hotel. I don't think the citizens of the town want the hotel. So, secondly, I think that the town seems to react to whatever shiny object developers bring your way. So we've seen the One University Place come our way, now we've seen the hotel. I question what's coming next. And I think it'd be better served to have a longer-term plan. I seem to recall some kind of long-term plan being circulated a few years ago, and I don't recall a hotel on there. So it seems to be that we should have a long-term plan and work it, instead of react opportunistically to what comes our way, maybe shape the town to what we want it to be. And then lastly, I don't think you guys should feel so good about what a good deal you guys have cut with the developer. I mean, it's a classic move is to talk about something really big and terrible, and then just make it sort of bad and terrible. And it strikes me as that's what's happened here. So I just leave you with that, and thank you for your time.
Thank you, Marshall. Would anyone else like to speak? Okay, Mark.
Good evening. Mark Reiner, 77 Olive Court. I've been here. I'm going to say the same things that I've said every single time because they're still true and they're still really important. And you guys need to hear it. 3 of you won't be on city council in a matter of 2 months. 2 of you may. Okay? 3 of you may, pardon me. 2 won't, right? Pardon me. There's a 4-to-1 vote that needs to go in favor of this development. So the math doesn't work in anyone's favor in University Heights to rush this thing through. Okay? It just doesn't. The legacy that you would commit and actually deliver, inflict, whatever words I can come up with a lot of words. Whatever the actual outcome is going to be very permanent, and it's going to live well beyond whatever vote you're trying to rush through now. The CZA, which I agree with Jerry, is coming cart before the horse. It's already, been voted upon. Doesn't adequately include protections that the zoning committee outlined as very important for the bordering neighbors to the west of the proposed development. We're talking about the barrier, the buffer. We're talking also about, as has been Larry brought up earlier, about the mass of the building. Okay, these are things that are highly inadequate, highly inadequately addressed at this point. If this current PUD is going to go through, okay. The bigger 2 things. One, the vision for the community from the community's perspective. Where is it? Second thing, property values. What are the impacts? you can, query folks that bought recently in the area of the One University Place surrounding neighborhoods. They'll tell you some of them got a deal after One University Place went in because One University Place just went in. We're talking thousands of dollars that, people had to their advantage coming in and buying in University Heights. What I'm saying is that a development like this has a track record in this city of lowering the adjacent property values. As someone who's pouring in, upwards of $200,000 of my own hard-earned money in my house right now, I'm going to be injured by that if that happens. So, I know exactly what what I've put into this house. I know exactly what the valuation is right now, which is currently going up, and I'm going to be tracking that. So I urge you very strongly to consider at least just slowing this down. There's no rush to doing this before a November election when, the actual vote may be very different, the discussion may be very different, the tenor may be very different. If this is going to go through, fine. What's the point of rushing it through? We can talk about it. Thanks for listening.
Thank you. Yes. Okay, they're pointing both ways. Okay. Ann Dedler?
Hi, I'll make this brief. I'm Ann Dudler. I live at 205 Kozer Avenue and have lived there for 30 years. I know there may be a perception that I am anti-development on all grounds. That's not the case. What I am against the developer driving the process. This should be something that our community decides, not a developer. That's pretty much all I have to say. Slow it down.
Thank you, Ann. Rich Schmidt? Are you going to talk about the hotel, Rich?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I know you want to talk about other things too, but you'll do that a little later.
Just to the motel.
Thank you.
First of all, I'm for it. Secondly, we're going to need the revenue. Thirdly, we got the university to build a hotel. So are you going to give them an opportunity to come and visit the council? No, because they don't have to. They can just walk in and build whatever they darn well please. And I know that because I used to do it. And as a result of this, I am for it. I think we're going to need the money in the future. My street has needed repair just about since the day I moved in. And that was in 1977. So we talked to Josiah, and I saw him over there the other day. So that's the first time I complained in all these years.
About the street, Rich.
No, yeah, just about the street. I'd like to see Jim's figures. I'd never looked at them and have him explain them to me. Other than that, I think I still am pro motel, and I think it's up to the community to hold the developers' feet to the fire to make it a fine place. Thank you for the time.
Thank you, Rich.
By the way, I am at 207 Mahaska Drive.
Thank you. Mr. Shriver.
Just pull the whole, tip, there you go, David.
100, my name is David Shriver, 100 Sunset Street. Just to give you a little premise first, I am a corporate attorney, so some of this, what I've prepared is from a more legal perspective, but I'm nobody's attorney here, so no representations made. I'd first like to address the developers. If I were your attorney, I would be sure to advise you to proceed with caution if this council hastily proceeds to rezone prior to the November election. Why? What happens if the hotel motel revenue tax is not passed in November? Or what happens if residents of University Heights vote in a majority of councilors who ran in opposition to the proposed hotel? In either case, you would be faced with a council that would be obligated to rescind the rezoning, whether immediately in the case the revenue tax is not approved, or in January when the new council takes office. Now you might think, well, not ideal, but you could sue the city. because you relied on the rezoning and proceeded with the purchase and possibly even commenced development. However, the law, as I understand it, requires that you rely in good faith on the rezoning. So, would you be comfortable going before a judge and claiming you went forward in good faith with the purchase and development despite knowing, one, that the city had yet to pass the hotel revenue tax, without which I don't think any of the councilors could reasonably support rezoning. Two, that the residents in November could vote in councilors in opposition to your proposal. You have a direct economic interest in seeing that the rezoning sticks and is not in haste. Point being, any rezoning passed cannot reasonably be relied upon until after the outcome of the November election. And to the council, what happens if you vote to rezone prior to the election and the revenue tax doesn't pass? Or what happens if a majority of councilors are elected that ran in opposition to the rezoning? Do you recognize that if you rezone now, that the developer will have a rather perverse incentive to work in opposition to the hotel tax? I'm not saying they would, but there is that interest. If litigation ensues because this council or the next council is obligated to rescind the rezoning due to the non-passage of the hotel tax or a new majority in council, what will you tell your fellow residents why you rushed to vote rather than wait? Some in the council have talked about the opportunity. What of it? The developers aren't going anywhere. They said they can wait, and it is in the best interest to wait. It can't even be about revenue because we don't know yet whether the city will receive revenue from the hotel tax. Waiting minimizes risks and gives more opportunity to assess various unknowns. Not just the outcome of the November election, but also what the university ultimately pursues with respect to the university club. Rezoning now presents a multitude of risks, some unlikely, but many of which can be eliminated through patience. So I ask each of you on the council, if you were planning to hold a final vote on this rezoning prior to the November election, why? The residents of U Heights deserve an answer from each of you on the record. Thank you.
David, what impact does the not passing the tax have on the developers?
Not passing the tax?
The sales tax. What is that impact?
Then they don't have a tax on them.
Right.
Please don't speak out. Please don't speak out. Okay, go ahead.
As I said, I mean, it's not really, it's a perverse interest to have that the rezoning passed now or be prior to the election, and then the developer, I'm not saying they would do this, it's a conflict within itself. But the simple fact that the hotel tax hasn't passed, although the rezoning has, they could be sitting here and saying, well, let's hope it doesn't pass. And then they can fight if you guys try to rescind the rezoning because the hotel tax doesn't pass. We're kind of in a quagmire. It doesn't make a whole lot of sense other than wait past the election. If the residents vote and both are conscious that they want the development, great, move forward. We're talking about 2 months. But right now, it doesn't make sense until that hotel tax passes as well.
It's $200,000 in property tax.
Yeah, I'm not
coming due out of this hotel.
Right. But you don't know whether it's going to pass.
$1 million budget. That's a 20% increase.
Can you guarantee it's going to pass?
That's not, you were talking.
That's the property tax.
Property tax, David. That's what I'm talking about. I don't know what we're going to get out of the sales tax.
Right.
There's been estimates. I think they've been anywhere from 400,000 to 200,000.
Yes. But the revenue that you're looking at, what I'm looking at, are you going to tell me that you're making the decision regardless of whether the hotel tax passes? Do all the councilors here believe that they would vote for that if the hotel tax does not pass?
I think the hotel tax would just come up again and again until it passes.
If that's the legacy you want to leave, and you're going to wipe your hands clean of it?
No, it's not a legacy I want to leave.
Jim,
but I
why are you
also think you're trying to misinform folks about this tax. We're talking about Not only that, but the Airbnb and the other types of things going on here.
Yeah, I didn't say it's not going to pass. I said, what happens if it doesn't pass?
Wait.
Fine.
And it is just...
And you're not answering the question. Why not wait?
Excuse me. It is just not appropriate for you to attack somebody and say they're trying to misinform people. It's just not appropriate.
Well, never mind. Thank you. I would try not to
Okay.
do that, Jerry.
Mike Crocker's going to speak now.
A lot of this will sound similar to what you just heard. So bear with me. Michael Crocker from 1490 Grand Avenue. And again, I will start out by saying I'm not opposed to development in general in University Heights. I do hope that the City Council will make sound and strategic development decisions with purpose and vision for our unique city. The proposed development is the wrong development for the property, and it falls short in a number of ways. The development adds no cultural value or amenities that the residents of University Heights would find value in. It does not contribute to a walkable, bikeable community. And it was exactly the promise of these types of amenities that drove the approval of One University Place and was one of the primary reasons for the TIF financing that was driven through for this development. The courtyard proposal is not consistent with the University Heights comprehensive plan. There's an entire chapter dedicated to sense of place in that plan. And this proposal, one of the large portions of that is maintaining the residential character of our neighborhoods, and this proposal is not consistent with that. I also think it's shown to be the wrong development because the zoning commission voted 4-1 against rezoning in a supermajority, and that's in alignment with the community feedback that you're continuously receiving. Additionally, now is not the right time to vote on this development. We do not yet know the impact of the hotel proposal at the University Club location and whether the university will actually pay property tax and hotel motel tax to University Heights if that is located in University Heights property. Jim Lane, you yourself stated you believe that was a 50% chance that that hotel lands in University Heights property. And in looking at the published plans for the new clubhouse, I think you're probably right, and it may actually be higher.
Just to be clear, I said I hope we get 50%. I'm not sure if it's close there, but.
And I know that the university has communicated that their intention is that that hotel would pay taxes on the property. Not on the property, but on the building and in the operation of the building, because that will be done by a private entity.
Well,
we do not yet know the full impact, positive or negative, of a completed OUP on our community, and we'll learn more as occupancy rises in the coming months. As clearly stated, University Heights does not vote on the hotel motel tax until November 7th, and it would not be responsible for council to approve rezoning for the many reasons you just heard until the hotel motel tax is in place. 2 long-term members of the council are retiring and not seeking re-election. This part is a little bit of opinion, but I would personally not feel right about making a vote on such a long-standing decision and then walking away. Money is nice, but there is no financial urgency. I understand there is a significant amount of tax revenue at stake here. At the August 28th council meeting, our finance chair, Jim Lane, was emphatic and very emphatic. Quote, "I never said we are broke. We do not need this project. We are doing just fine." And you were very emphatic and made very convincing statements. There is no, repeat, zero financial urgency. So my suggestion is to table the vote until after the November 7th election. Let's get more definitive information available on the University of Iowa hotel plans, which they've indicated will be forthcoming in the coming months, not years, in the form of an RFP. Let's allow time for a comprehensive study and a strategic plan development, and let's take into account the current and broader community views of this proposal in light of all the other concurrent developments around University Heights. Lastly, I did find it very helpful in the zoning commission that the commissioners provided discussion of their thoughts and their evaluation process before casting votes, so I would encourage the council to do the same. I personally, in light of all these facts, can find no logical, rational reason for voting on this proposal now, and especially not for an affirmative vote. The community and the zoning commission have expressed supermajority opposition to this proposal, and we're financially stable without this proposal. We may wind up benefiting financially from the hotel at the University Club site anyway. The developers and Jim Glasgow stated publicly at the August 28th meeting, he's been watching this property for 20 years and he's not going anywhere anytime soon, regardless of what happens with the University Clubs in the hotel there. We don't yet have an assured hotel motel tax, so there's no risk to the community in waiting until we have this relevant information available in order to make a responsible and informed decision for the community. And we're talking about a difference of a few months. However, there is significant risk to the community if you proceed now with a decision before we have all the available information. In light of all of these facts, every member of the University Heights community deserves an answer from each counselor. Why do you think it's appropriate to vote at this time? And what is your justification for an affirmative vote?
That's 5 minutes.
That's
Thank
all I
you.
have to say.
That's very good. Thank you. Would anyone else like to speak? Pat Bauer.
Speaking as a resident and not as chair of the zoning commission, I think there are a lot of pros and cons for this project. The thought that this project should go forward without hotel motel tax to me is just crazy. The big payoff from this is the dedication of a substantial portion of that hotel motel tax to recreation, to purchasing the Swisher tract, to neighborhood stabilization. For this project to go forward without that tax. Now again, Jim says we'll just keep passing it, submitting it till it passes. But if you assume that it won't pass, then to me this is lopsided. This is not a, evenly balanced, you could say, on both sides. I've spoken, I think this is the third time coming around to the timing. We have, as I see it, 4 places on the timeline. This could be approved before the election. It could be approved after the election in November with the results of the election and the tax ballot issue. It could be approved after a redo of the comprehensive plan, which might put it off for 6 months. It could be decided after we figure out what the university is going to do, which could take years to get to. I can see reasons not to wait years. I can see reasons not to wait 6 or 8 months. I can see absolutely no reason not to wait a month. Again, I mentioned the last time I spoke, I think that the biggest mistake this council ever made was passing the OUP rezoning in December of 10. I think that left such a bitter taste in the mouths of people, particularly since the council had declined to have a special meeting so that the ballot issue could have been brought on that fall. It was pressed into January. And so I just think that jamming things through, cramming things through, is something I've been trying to avoid all along this time around. And I beseech you, don't do that again this time. I just think it was a big mistake last time. Wait until November. This project has merits. Let the people decide. My guess, my prediction would be that it will receive support of majority of our residents. And as I've said before, I hope both sides would accept the outcome of the election. But I just think it's disastrous for this thing to be approved and then to have election go the other way. I just think that would lead to acrimony and division, and Lord knows we don't need that.
Thank you, Pat. Would anyone else like to speak? Yeah, Al Lev. If you can get through the obstacle course we have.
Al F., 215 Sunset Street. I hate to say it, but I've lived in University Heights for 54 years, and I'm not going to be too impacted by what happens by your motel project, but I think it's a real travesty to see how it is developing. I think of our life in University Heights. We've raised all 3 children. The quality of life that we have, the quality of life that people will have when they buy our house is something we want to perpetuate. So I do have a concern on how things are moving, and it's on a fast track for no reason. It started in August when people were out of town, special meetings and this and that, you didn't start them. That's what I found out about then, and there were special meetings. Whatever, I'm not talking to Jim and Mike because I know they're off the council. I'm talking to Sylvia and Dottie. If this comes up for a vote, the way to slow this down is to just vote no. Join Jerry so you don't have a supermajority vote, and then start planning and involving people's input, and don't ram it. That's all I've got to say.
Thank you, Al. Would anyone else? Nick?
Nick Herbold, 1250 Melrose. I definitely don't want to be repetitive. Seems like a lot has been said. I would just ask that you respect the citizens, slow the process down, and the only other point that I would add is I just disagree with the idea that a big hotel with a big parking lot is going to increase home ownership, even taking into account that 2 houses would be donated in whatever form. I think that the deterrent to buy a house, buy a large hotel, will outweigh this idea that giving 2 houses over to the city is going to help increase home ownership. Thank you.
Thank you. Susan?
Susan Stamnus, 326 Highland. I am also not opposed, but I would like to see this slow down. I'm very concerned about traffic. That's something I haven't heard mentioned yet. I'd like to see how OUP changes our traffic flow. I'm not quite sure where this hotel is going to come out, but I absolutely don't think it can come out onto Melrose there, right by the bridge. That's going to be a disaster. It can go out on the other side. There's plenty of space back there into those apartments, but I'm worried about that.
Thank you. Would anyone else like to speak? Okay, I close the public hearing. We'll go on to,
Can we take like a 5-minute break?
yeah, what time? Oh, it's 9 o'clock. Gee, yeah, that'd be a good idea, 5-minute break. Okay, so.
Are we starting?
Yeah, so the council's present again, so I'm going to go ahead and start. And first of all, we have discussion on study of the impact and community views of the proposed Marriott Hotel and the MPO-JC's pending revision of comprehensive land use and development plan for University Heights. And Jerry, you asked this be on the agenda, and Kent Ralston's here.
Yeah, I thought it was, well, it was raised at the last meeting that we needed a longer-term plan to make this decision, that nobody makes important decisions like this without a plan. The developers had a plan. He's been working on that plan coherently for over 20 years, he says, and that can be respected. We should have a plan also. We don't have a plan with any specificity that would speak to what's being done. So Jim, at the last meeting, said, well, why don't you go look for one or see how you can get it? It's going to be too expensive. Go find one. Well, I called Kent Ralston and had a discussion with him and asked him how he might be able to help, or if he had access to resources that could inform a plan such as we need and get community views and build a plan around that. And he said his organization certainly could do that. In fact, Louise had contacted them several months ago and asked them to revisit the development plan, and he'd be perfectly willing to get involved in a discussion of that with the residences and to pose a plan to the council. So I've asked him to come here and speak and see what he has to say and what that would entail. Thank you for being here.
Thanks, Kent.
Yeah, thanks, Kent Ralston, Director of the MPO. That was a good segue, and I appreciate that. Yeah, what Councilman Zimmerman said is all true. What he's referring to is that back in the spring, the mayor sits on our board, And what we do every spring is ask for items for our work program. So in our FY18 work program is a item that Louise asked for to facilitate revisions to comprehensive plan, including correspondence, online survey, and community meetings. Now, I won't hold you to just that or exactly that, but what Jerry Zimmerman said was true. We can help with a comp plan revision. In fact, we helped with the 2010 revision, which was the most recent. We would take our cues, of course, from the council like we did back in 2010. I would expect that when working on the comp plan revision, all of those items are true. We would need at least one community meeting, if not more, surveys, electronic correspondence, written correspondence, and whatever other outlets the council so chooses. Depending on what the council would like, I was intending to start that either late fall or early winter, just because that's when our construction season slows down a little bit and affords us some more time to do those sorts of things. But that's also up for debate. And really just depends on our workload.
Would you be able to get the views of the community about the motel, and could you provide to the council information about what impact the motel might have on a residential community like this?
The first one, definitely. If that's what the council wants us to ask, we can certainly ask questions in any or all of those formats that we talked about related specifically to the motel. I think that'd be, or the hotel, that'd be fine. And yeah, to some degree, I think we can discuss what the impacts are of a hotel. I'm certainly not an expert on hotels specifically. But in terms of, you know, what the surrounding neighborhood might look like, depending on the information we get back from the community, we would do our best, sure.
My understanding is that you have a new urban and regional planner on your staff who could look into the scholarship and the research behind those questions.
Yeah, definitely. Sarah Walls on our staff. She's only been with the MPO for maybe 3 years now, 2 years. But she has been in urban planning with the city of Iowa City for a decade or longer. So certainly I'd want to get Sarah involved in that process, and she'd be a good resource for all of us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Do you have any questions for Kat?
I did. I'm interested in knowing if Sarah Walls would be able to have a general discussion of the comprehensive plan. I'm not interested in coming in with preconceived notions. I just want to, I want to be able to do something that we did in the vision program. It was very open-ended, big discussion.
Right.
Good.
Yeah, back in 2010, what we did was we actually held one, if not more, public meetings at the athletic club. I'd say we had at least 100 people turn out. You know, we have questions that the council prepared and wanted us to ask. We sit around on tables, you know, we discuss as a group and as neighborhoods, as neighbors, whatever it is. And then we report back, and then the same thing for the survey questions. I mean, whatever we get through survey questions goes straight to the community. We synthesize that information and then present it to you just as it is. And unless there's another timeline that we need to follow, what I had told Jerry Zimmerman and Jim Lane in our separate conversations was I would just keep in touch, and you know, whenever our workload looked a little bit lighter, we would start that process again. Hopefully, well, early winter. I didn't have any specific month in mind, I guess.
But the comprehensive plan redevelopment would be general in nature, would you say? Or not?
Yeah, comprehensive plans in nature are more general. You know, the way I see it is University Heights is small enough. The last time we did the revisions, we really just, we sort of nipped around the edges a little bit and kind of revised the financial section and some of the zoning items and some maps and things. What we may be able to do this time, and what I would propose, is maybe even kind of dicing the community up into quadrants so we can actually take harder looks at each individual area. And, you know, whether or not that takes longer or not, it remains to be seen. But we could certainly do those sorts of things. You know, we could go east of Melrose, west of Melrose, north or south of the Sunset. I mean, just so we get more neighbor in it.
Right.
You don't have to use those geographic boundaries, but just so you can look into neighborhoods more specifically.
We already have some good boundaries that you probably could make use of.
Yeah, I mean, there's no.
Got the Melrose corridor, the first subdivision,
there's
second,
no
third, and
for a
fourth.
comprehensive plan. I mean, some
No need to
comprehensive
reinvent.
plans are posters. I mean, believe it or not, it's just a poster. It's their visions and goals and ideas. But then some communities have much more intense and much more specific comp plans. So
yeah, and that's what I wanted to ask about. Where it's not only the general that the council might be interested, but if there is scholarship and research and information about the specifics of impacts of hotels of this kind on communities like this. There's no reason not to have it before us
Sure.
in a professional form.
Yeah, we would take our cues from you.
Right, that's what I certainly would be looking for.
And just so everybody knows, I mean, the way the MPO operates is you pay into our organization, so we essentially act as consultants. So like any other consultant, we would take our cues from you, and to the degree we can be of help, that's what we're here for.
And so we should just get back to you. Is that?
Yeah,
is
yeah.
that
I mean,
what
I
you
think
were
we work
just-
close enough together, Mayor, that we can talk about the timeline. But like I said, there's no magic time that we would start this. Maybe there is for the community. I don't know that, but for us, it's just a matter of finding some staff time to start the process. But
So you're thinking November, December, or January?
that's what I had thought before I even knew of the hotel development. But maybe that changes things for the community. But generally speaking, things slow down for us starting in October, November, just because construction season slows down a little bit. So that's what I had originally intended, but that's certainly up for debate.
Okay. Any other questions?
Just a quick one, Ken. And knowing that we have a plan in place already, and I know, as you said, that plans are somewhat general. To me, looking at this plan, the strength of this plan, and I think I think Jerry would say that the weakness of this plan is it doesn't talk about a where for redevelopment, but I think the strength of this plan talks about a why and talks about reasons and factors that are important to consider when deciding how to proceed with redevelopment. I think that you had mentioned that there are various types of plans, but I think that's what this last revision of the plan was to focus more on why might it be important to consider redevelopment and what are the things to take into account when you make redevelopment decisions.
Yeah, certainly, and I don't think we want to start from scratch. I mean, because you do have a good solid foundation, but I mean, to the extent that we want to revise things, that's again up for debate.
Okay.
Okay, thank you so much for staying for 2 hours before you got on. I appreciate it so much, Kent. Thank
Anytime.
you.
Thank you.
So, I don't think we should discuss now about do you want to discuss more about the plan or starting it? I kind of want to keep moving on the agenda.
Okay.
But I want to.
Mind moving on, I just don't want to railroad anything through, that's all.
The next thing is Mike Haverkamp talked with the Tim Wetzel survey.
Sure. This is.
I'm sorry, what?
I didn't realize what I had originally included in the packet yesterday was not Tim's complete final version. At the August special meeting, asked about doing some information looking into doing a property survey similar to what happens when a local district or national registered district is put together. Tim Weitzel lives in Iowa City. He's a former head of the Iowa City Historic Preservation Commission. He also has his own historical consulting firm. He did a background search on the 901 Melrose property. It's a fascinating read. One of the big conclusions that he comes to is that the county assessor is completely wrong when they say 1895 build date on the house, because construction materials in the house are most certainly post 1900 and likely post 1910. It's a fascinating little description about how you, looking through the various historical maps, none of which list this property anywhere. He gives a little bit of background on University Heights in general. I think the place for us to, and I don't really want to take a whole lot of time on this, I think it's probably about here. Couple of things that you look at if you were to evaluate even as something like a National Register placement, which has to be done by a property owner of a single property. One thing you look at are historic owners, events associated with the city, those kinds of things, as well as the architectural interest and significance of the house itself. Talks about one of the longest owners was Dr. Frederick Staub, who was a surgeon at the VA. He talks a bit about the architectural style of the house. One of the things he mentions is that the cement block foundation is what truly makes the 1895 date likely not correct, that's listed on the county assessor site. There are several additions that postdate the period of significance of the building. The outbuildings. One of the things he talks about is that it's very likely that the original porch was taken off as well. This is the bit about the concrete blocks. The statement of significance, I think, talks about it possesses association perhaps with the history of Johnson County. However, its significance to the city of University Heights does not seem to be much of a connection. Basically, what I would say is that it's a nice house. There's no compelling reason that it would need to stay in this site. I know there's been a lot of discussion of moving it. If that's a possibility, it's a nice house. That's kind of the results of the survey.
Okay. Are there any questions by the council for him?
So, but historical significance is more, I mean, there's no individual, is, I think, what you said.
There are various things that you look at with historical significance in terms of were there events. There are none that we could find through this typical survey. There have been additions and changes to the house that have changed some of the roof line and the porch pitches and things that are things that you typically look in something that would be a significant architectural finding. None of those are necessarily there. So.
Any other comments? Okay, we'll go on to the Swisher Trust and Flom House Conservation. Sylvia, did you want to talk about that now?
I did. I wanted to bring to the council's attention that the Swisher Track has been active in disposing assets that are owned in the trust in very good areas of Iowa City's downtown historic, the commercial district. The latest sale happened on August the 2nd. It went for $2.1 million. And that leads me to conclude that there's got to be a lot of capital gains that have to be paid or taxes that have to be paid on that. Which leads me to my next conclusion that it would be a good opportunity at this point for this council to take action to see if we can't approach or start opening up a relationship with the trust administration to see if we can't eventually convince them to dedicate the land or allow us to purchase the land so that it becomes a parkland or a green space for our community. I'm worried that if we don't take initiatives and good steps in that direction, other entities or other organizations will step in and move in those shoes. So the second comment with respect to the Swisher Track is that in reaching out to some of my conservation colleagues, I have become aware that it would be a smart idea for the city of University Heights to partner up with a well-known, well-respected conservation group. And I have been looking into different conservation groups in the Johnson County area, one of which has a member of one of our residents who is an active board member in the executive leadership team. We have a number of volunteers that donate their time to this organization that live in our community. And lastly, we also happen to have Kathy Belgum, whom has entrusted this group with conserving some of her family heritage through their family farm. The organization I'm referring to is the Bear Oak Trust of Johnson County, and I'd like to see if there is direction from this council now to see if I can coordinate with the director, bring the director in to explain to us what it is that the Bear Oak Trust does and how it could help us or not with the Swisher conversations with the trust group. Which leads me to another conclusion, which is we have to start thinking long-term and strategic about the last remaining parcels of land in University Heights. And many individuals in the course of the last 90 days have expressed an interest in conservation of the Flom Historic House. But their concern is, where does it go? Where do you place it? What would you use it for? And I have at least started off with a proposition that this council needs to at least start looking into, well, where does this property land? You know, this historic house, where could it land? And one of the residents said, why don't you work on a lease to drop off the land on Swisher? So it's an interesting concept. I don't know if it goes anywhere, but you know, a lot of tiny dreams start off that way, and I'd like to think that there's room for that in all the hustle and bustle of our community and for this council to consider. So if there's no objections, I'd like to get some consensus and move in that direction.
And so you want to coordinate with the
Bear Oak Trust, bring them in.
Yeah, it's a good group, and I think we ought to be talking to them to see what we can do.
Mm-hmm.
It's a good group. There's no question in my mind that it's a good group. I just don't know if it's a timely thing to do, if anybody knows where the trust is on talking about the Swisher track in which we might have an interest.
If you don't ask, you don't know. So I say let's work on it.
I'm not suggesting otherwise. I'm asking, does anybody have an idea, Steve, about where the trust is in terms of that parcel?
Not specifically. I did speak to the trustee as well as the lawyer for the trust, and their indications were that at the time we spoke, they had their hands full with the sale in Iowa City. They were selling some properties in Burlington, and they weren't in a position where they were really that was on the forefront. Things may have changed since then. That's about all I can tell you.
My only concern is to putting the cart before the horse again. Is we should know about what their intent is if they have one now, or what their timeline is if they have one now, before we get another organization involved to spend their time, which may or may not be wasteful.
Well, I think we also have an opportunity to make our interests known. And if they are disposing of property, it's only a matter of time before they dispose of that.
Right. And the disposal of the property on August 2nd went for approximately $2.1 million, and it also went $2.9 million, and it went to a non-Hawkeye group, they're an outside group from Illinois, with a lot more money than
I thought it was Minnesota.
Minnesota, I think.
Yeah.
Well, out of state. Out of state money, and I just thought, take note. We don't need to go through that again.
You want her to look into it.
That's fine.
All right.
I think we look, and then we'll decide once we get some feel as to whether or not we want to, how much further we want to pursue it. Because I think it is one of the more ideal ways to handle that trust, to handle that property, in fact. So.
And not only that, they have worked and partnered up. It's not uncommon for these conservation organizations to really assist in a co-consulting role and maybe end up managing property on behalf of the parties involved. But at the end of the day, I think it would behoove us to partner up with more experienced organizations that know what they're doing.
Okay.
All right.
I feel you have consensus of the council.
I do too. Thank you very much.
Thank you. The next agenda item is The second consideration of ordinance number 208, amending the zoning ordinance number 79 to create a commercial hotel zone that would establish a procedure for the property to be redeveloped as a 5-story hotel comprising no more than 140 rooms and associated amenities, including lobby space, a restaurant, cafe, and/or bistro, meeting space, and a fitness center. Second consideration is before the council.
I move second consideration of the resolution.
Second.
Or the ordinance.
Motion by Jim Lane, second by Mike. Discussion.
If I may, I
Yes.
sent an email today, discussion with the developers and their lawyer. There was some language in the ordinance that they said was basically a showstopper. The idea that the city, through a PUD development agreement, could regulate the hours of operation of the hotel. You know, in other words, they're saying we can't get a Marriott flag, we can't open a hotel and run it unless we can be open 24/7. Regulating hours of operation of outside service areas and deliveries and things like that, they said they could live with. I changed the ordinance before you in that regard, and as I said in my email today, so you have to either start over, and this is your first consideration, didn't know it at the time the agenda was made, or if you want to keep pace with where you are, you would collapse 1 and 2 into tonight's reading. You don't have to do either one, you don't have to do either one of those things, but you can't have this be the second consideration of the ordinance because it's changed.
So because the developer said it was a non-deal, you changed the ordinance, and now you're posing that the council vote on it and collapse it.
No, the council does what it wants. I did change the ordinance after consulting with some people on the council and the mayor because, you know, the developer said we can't go forward. And you don't have to accept that. You can move forward on the first one, obviously.
Yeah, I have some conceptual problems that I'm not sure how they're to be fixed, and maybe they don't need to be fixed. But first, I think I owe Greg Stiltner an apology. At one of the earlier meetings, I accused him of lying to me when at lunch at a very early stage in this, he said that I was the only holdout against this motel. And Greg, I apologize. I understand you might have rightfully believed that at the time and had reason to believe it. I'm sorry about that, but that's what the evidence suggests. The other thing, another thing is that I raised the issue last meeting about getting the financials of the developer. And the financials are important, so we can assess whether or not there's a need to be 140 rooms and have the footprint that it has and be the size that it has. Once we write that into the change of the zoning ordinances that it's for 140 rooms, and I think that's in there if I'm not mistaken, what good are the financials? I mean, nobody's asked for those financials yet. Everybody says, oh yeah, 140 rooms, that's fine, when the financials seem to be such a big thing, and Jim came to the defense of the developer for the financials. But the deal is done when the zoning ordinance is passed. And the feel-good CZA is just a feel-good. It will be a 140-room hotel. It will be in University Heights. And it will have the impact that nobody seems to know about now. The importance of this to me, as I said earlier, is it's not a matter of winning or losing, of having the motel or hotel or not having it. It may be a good and the right thing, but we don't know that, and nobody knows that. All I know is that there is a great deal of dissension, and I see the winner or loser in this discussion as the community. To keep the process open, not to delay it forever or even for very long, but even to the election. And I tell you, if I'm elected, I will work against this if that's what the residents want. I will do whatever is necessary to reverse this zoning if I'm elected and there's support to not have this. So I'm not sure how it will fly, but I'm committed to listen to the residents and to do what they say. And I know those of you who are not running don't have that responsibility or obligation, but you're willing to make up your minds anyway without information that Kent Ralston says, and he is a trusted non-political figure, says he could help get us. He could help get us the plan. He could help get us the vision of the community. Why not wait for that? Why not give us an opportunity to hear that? Maybe the hotel is the right thing to do. As everybody has said, this developer has been forthright, direct. He said he's not going away. He wants to do this. Why not wait for the next election or for Kent Ralston's report to see what the community wants and act accordingly? I don't see any downside to it. I see the CZA is a CYA, and it does not going to have much impact. And I think what is written in the zoning ordinance will be done if it passes with very little resistance until the next council is in place. And I think the peace and respect within the community is at stake, and it's not worth risking that. And if the community wants this hotel, so be it.
Any other discussion by council?
Yes, actually, I do want to discuss a couple of points because I've been tracking the hotel issue for some time, and one of the things that I am adamant about is that you explain your vote. I agree with Chairman Pat Bauer and a number of other residents who have said, explain your vote. We can respect your vote if you provide an explanation, but if you don't explain your vote, then we can't understand what you were thinking. So here's what I am thinking generally. Number one, let's talk about the timeline, because as of tonight, we have seen at least one member of the public who was confused about how fast or how slow or how soon or how quickly or how far along this transaction is or this decision is. And I'd like to draw attention to a timeline that is publicly available at the Zoning Commission's website section. And it started off with Pat Bauer on an email that's in PDF that starts off with the first mention of this hotel proposal with November 2016. The next formal touch point of this hotel proposal comes to council and the public on December 2016. The next time that this hotel proposal matter comes before council is January 2017. The next time this proposal comes to the public in public community forums is March 2017, twice. And thereafter, all the way through up until now, we've had zoning commission meetings. There's approximately about 18 or so meetings that have taken place on this issue, with approximately about 100 plus comments received from different residents on the record, and of course many of the more that I've spoken to that are off the record for different reasons. So to clarify the timeline involved in today's vote, it's extremely important that be brought up to the public's attention, that this issue has not creeped up in August like the confused resident indicated. When I shook my head, he looked genuinely concerned that he was out of touch with that timeline. The second issue that is of consideration and was of consideration, so for me was, well, what's my obligation with making a vote at this time today? To Jerry's comments, my My situation involves the following assessment of why we were sworn into office on January 1. We all took to oath that we would represent the city's business, our communities, things that need to get accomplished as counselors. This issue came up in December, and all of us started thinking about this issue in January and in March, and later as it evolved and it started getting a little bit more firmed up and shaped up, people needed to start, doing their due diligence. As an elected official, I find it to be odd that I'm being asked to postpone, delay any of the community's decision making. When this information came to light, in the middle of half of the term. Our terms are 2 years, 24 months. This issue came up at about month 11 or 12, and I'm being asked to postpone for something that I'm held responsible for from day one of assuming a 2-year term as a counselor. I think that is irresponsible governing. It sets our city at risk for being a flimsy city that cannot make up its mind, and that its decisions from its prior councils can't be trusted going forward for anything, big decisions, small decisions, whatever size or shape. So for me, those are the two big conceptual issues that have been circulating as a result of tonight's vote. But I've got to tell you that the explanation that I have been waiting to state to the public is as follows: that my vote tonight is with the utmost respect for the diversity of views that have been generated publicly and passionately from members of our community, including those members and residents that don't want to show up to council because it's an uncomfortable setting for them to view their public opinions. I also want to take the time to thank the zoning commissioners for identifying issues and spending the time to educate me on the side as to why they voted a particular way or why they didn't. It was important for me to do that due diligence. My vote tonight reflects the proposition that our city of University Heights cannot jeopardize its most valuable trait, and that is our residential character, which many residents describe as being the majority, having a community with a majority of long-term stakeholders, both that are renters and homeowners, that enjoy the proximity to Iowa City's cultural action, services, and employers. Effective January 1, 2018, Des Moines' deregulation of our rental program is a direct threat to our residential character. For me, the hotel is a tool to help our community define, shape, and protect its future. That concept is in writing in the hotel tax language, where 90% of the unrestricted hotel tax funds will be used for neighborhood stabilization, revitalization, infrastructure repairs, and acquisition of green spaces or parklands. In my opinion, if we as a community don't take action now, circumstances will change us whether we want the change or not. That's why this zoning change will enable us to take actions that will further define us now, not later, not any other time. And those options are for us, what are we going to do with that flum property? What options do we have? What do we gain with long-term homeowners on a street known for student housing owned by investors that by and large don't live in our community? The other thing that we're doing here with the zoning change is that we're taking charge. We're telling the developer to stay in their corner, which happens to be next to the railroad tracks in a piece of land that no one hardly recognizes. There's been more confusion as to whether this hotel is the one by the farmer's market, at the athletic club, or where else is it located. And more importantly, I want to remind this council that there is a commitment in writing of approximately over $1 million over 10 years to revitalize our community. That's the tax that's before you on November 2nd. And finally, this allows us to make something come true with respect to that Swisher track. I think we owe it to our community to be competitive, and that means that we have to make decisions now. We can't postpone them and have ourselves completely taken off of the competition line on Swisher track or any other conservation efforts that we as a community decide to take. Finally, in no way do I see my vote tonight stopping the community from continuing to review its comprehensive plan and to develop policies that define our sense of residential character and create policies that protect the Olive Court homeowners. This vote tonight doesn't stop any of those things and many more from happening. For these reasons, I'm in support of this vote, and I look forward to working with the remainder of council to work on further protections that have been identified as needed in the subsequent PUD agreements. So that's the explanation that the public requested, and there you have it.
Yeah, just one thing, Sylvia, and I know you didn't intend this, but you confounded the words when you were talking about how long these issues and proposals have been before us. The issue has been before us for some time. It's been mentioned. The specific proposal has been before us for a very short time, and it does feel, with all the special meetings and the rush to vote, that it is been railroaded. So I wouldn't hold Al Leff accountable for misperceiving something. I think that we all might have misperceived a lot in the way this was handled and pushed ahead. And I wish you wouldn't confound the words issues and proposal. The proposal was a rather relatively recent development. The issue has been before us and mentioned for some time. The other thing is it's sort of Trumpian to say you want to preserve the residential nature of the community by having a hotel here. You know, it's a.
Madam Mayor, I'd like to call a question of order for the parliamentarian. Yeah. Is this appropriate rebuttal, or is this voting?
I think
it's discussion.
No, it's part of discussion.
Well,
yeah,
I do.
I just think it's a bizarre.
Is it part of decorum?
He's an elected official.
Sure. So I
and
didn't
he
know.
can
Okay,
discuss.
You're talking about decorum. Odd, but no, I think that it's a bizarre state to say I want to keep this very small community with, I think, 13 streets residential
15
by having a 140-room hotel at one end of it. Bizarre.
Would anyone else like to any other counselor make a comment?
Well, as far as this property, like many of you, I didn't know a lot of it even existed as I walked around because there's only one particular house down there. But back in 2014 or sometime maybe earlier than that, we've had at least 2 different proposals. Never made it to building and zoning because we quietly made it clear that it wasn't much of an interest. But there were 2 different proposals that came up. Basically student apartment housings for rent. Both of these would have led to more rental properties in our town, and the residents made it clear they didn't want it. The council was clear they did not want it, and so from that time, that has piqued my interest on what can we do with this particular property. And I want to begin with a couple of basic facts. We do not own, the city of University Heights does not own this property. I continue to make that point because everyone kind of assumes we can do whatever the hell we want to with it and wait and wait and wait. It's owned by Michael Flom. He's asking $2.5 million for this property, and he has a contract with Mr. Glasgow and Mr. Stilner for that price. The city can turn this down. We can turn down this rezoning. But there are no assurances what Michael Flom will do. Everyone keeps saying, well, we can wait. Well, is he going to wait? I don't know what he's going to do. But there's been no proposal on how the city should handle the next 6 months, 2 years, or 4 years, because I keep getting mixed signals. We need to wait on the impact of OUP. We need to wait on the impact of the hotel. All of these types of things. And these could be 6 months, and it could be 4 years. And so during that time period, we lose the opportunity to develop this property and our control on what it would look like. We could lose it, and that is a risk. that I'm not sure I'm willing to take. While many of you'd like to see a residential development there, the facts are that the price of the land really makes it difficult to put a reasonable owner occupied residential development on that property. Burkdale, when we were looking at OUP, I asked Jeff Hendrickson at the time, I said, what were your property costs? He said $60,000 to $70,000 per unit on these 5 or 6 units over there. So to do Burkdale on this particular property, it's about 40 units, which I'm not even sure will fit on there. I haven't tried to figure it out, but it's expensive. The commercial alternatives, quite frankly, that I've heard, brewery and mixed-use commercial residential, except for the historic hotel, I've heard about it either, all of these will either increase the traffic on Melrose, and in my estimation, increase the rental units in the city. Both the increased traffic on Melrose and rental units are not desirable by residents on either side of this question. While there's been no business plan presented with any of the commercial alternatives, including the historic hotel, but I'd say a number of those would not be profitable, because this land is expensive.
Jim, this land is only expensive at $2.5 million if it's rezoned. You know that. Why not say that and make that explicit? This land doesn't have an inherent intrinsic value of $2.5 million. It's only if it becomes rezoned is Mr. Glasgow contracted to purchase it. That is true.
The cash flow from football parking and renting out that residence will handle a $2.5 million project, Jerry.
That's right.
So it does have a value on that. The cash flow could work.
And we have to place a value as a council on what we have now, which is our residential character. Starting January 1, the deregulation of the rental units or programs throughout all of Iowa, including University Heights, means that the economic incentives for landlords to pack more students to homes is more of a reality than ever. And we have nothing in our toolbox as a city resource to take care of that. That's why you have properties on Olive Court and Lemur, one of which has a person who thought was part of our community come and tell us, why do I have 5 porta potties next to my $500,000 home if that's a home? What else is this being used for? We as a community need to start taking action now, because circumstances beyond our control are changing us. And those circumstances aren't waiting for any one of us to build a hotel or not, to wait for the athletic club, university facility folks to make up their mind as to what side of the line they're going to build or not. The change is coming, and we need to be ready for it. And it's today, September the 12th, and we don't even have an action plan for that. So how sad is that as a community? So I'm looking forward that the money from this hotel has got to be committed, dedicated to revitalizing our city, to take it back to a balance of long-term stakeholders that many residents are supportive of. I cannot tell you that in asking people, what do you think about this hotel? The consistent answer is, we are attracted to University Heights because of its residential character. I don't want the action that Iowa City has close to my home. So you know what? I really would like to decompress, taking a walk in a trail, jogging, strollers, and walking their dogs through a trail system. That's why the Swisher track has become such an important piece of conversation tonight, because that is reflective of a majority of people that I have spoken for that are pretty looking forward to having the city tooled with some resources to make these visions come through. They're kind of surprised to learn how we're just surviving or just paying our bills, but not taking proactive steps to do something better for the community.
As part of my research, I talked with John Westerkamp. He and his father Keith do most of the appraisals of hotels for financial institutions in the Midwest, as far as providing loans and that sort of stuff. They're very well thought of. He thinks, John did, that there is becoming a saturation point of too many hotels in Iowa City and Coralville. However, he thinks this hotel will be successful because of its location close to the hospital and campus, plus being associated with a strong brand like Marriott. When I asked about the success of a historic hotel in this location, he indicated the chances of success are lower, but he did not rule out that this hotel, a historic hotel, could be successful.
You mean like a boutique hotel?
Boutique hotel,
Okay.
whatever you want to call
Okay.
it. But I mean, this was the
Okay.
idea
I
I
just-
believe
okay.
that Aaron
Got it.
Crocker presented. And,
Okay.
you know, it's, I feel good about that thing, but I also recognize there's quite a bit of risk and there's no business plan or development on it, so I don't know quite what to think of. He does think hotels on the outskirts of our two towns will struggle in the future. One of the recent emails talked about upgrades and the hotel being maintained, and John commented that the larger chains, and especially Marriott, have very stringent requirements for their hotels to be upgraded by the owners on a periodic basis. If they're not upgraded in a timely fashion, Marriott will remove the franchisee. I've been staying in Marriotts for over 35 years, Courtyards in particular, and they do upgrade. They've done some nice work with their restaurants and those types of things, so, and the rooms, so I see it as I've stayed over the many years there. With a historic hotel, it would be up to the individual who's doing the development. Not to say they wouldn't do a good job and keep it up, but there's not a franchise. I'm assuming that's not going to be a franchise type of thing. I talked, as I said earlier, with the University of Iowa. There's about, you know, they've looked at 18 different locations already for this hotel. Their boutique hotel over here. They don't know where it's going to go. The individuals making the decision will be the developer and the university together, but the developer is yet to be awarded, and I'm sure they're even looking at more opportunities. What is fairly certain is that the university will straighten Finkbine Road by going through the University Club property and connect to Melrose Avenue, which will be widened eastward to 4-lane up to the Burkdale complex. As I've said, hopefully we'll get some portion of this hotel in University Heights, because we will probably lose some property tax from the tear down of the University Club, but time will tell. I believe the location of the hotel in a fairly secluded location in University Heights offers an opportunity for the city to not only increase the revenue significantly, but begin the innovative program for neighborhood revitalization, which I think will be a model for Johnson County. The developer is contributing residents that will move from rental to owner occupied without the city having to purchase these properties and using up capital. The 5% tax that we set up to receive from the OUP rebate will continue to help the city in our revitalization efforts of the properties and communities. I think the increased revenues could also help, as Sylvia's talked about, with the Swisher property. So that's enough for now. Thank you.
I have a comment or two to make also. I've been a resident since 1974 when I began law school. When I began to purchase my house, which I paid off 5 years ago. And I decided to build my retirement house next door because when I thought of where I was happiest and where did I feel I was part of a community, it was right here in University Heights. And so I have been listening to many voices for and against this project. And I want to note that there has been much misunderstanding circulated. I'm going to try to clarify a few points. The Zoning Commission defeated this, but what are the reasons behind their votes? One commissioner has been a resident for 6 years and was concerned about zoning inconsistencies, thinks that we should be looking at our municipal neighbors for direction, and had concerns that the university not control University Heights. Another commissioner had concerns about a sense of place, that we're moving toward a non-residential community, and concern about a historic house preservation, but the opportunity to build the hotel that might service out-of-state one-night hospital patients was not in her playbook. Another commissioner had concerns that the building was too high. There weren't enough buffers, that the orientation of the dwelling on the property was unacceptable. I wanted to preserve the historic house and wants more delay. One commissioner was in favor of the development, and she said she knew personally the value of a hotel near a hospital, realized that we can survive, but that we will not thrive, believes that these developers are proud of their work product, have accomplished a like hotel before, are local, and own the property immediately south, so that we would have egress for the business merchants through the south at a minimum. So to put these concerns to rest, I have looked to the conditional agreement, and I'm also going to nullify some of those arguments. The one about needing more time, I concur with Sylvia's assessment there, because it was in November 2016 that the discussions began, and that there have been 8 zoning meetings and 10 council and or special meetings, more than enough opportunity to be heard by everyone. The conditional use agreement has addressed the majority of the remaining concerns. The location on the property is best for the preservation of sensitive slopes and flora. We are being good neighbors by providing a hotel to assist overnight stays. There is no other in the area. If we take charge now and make our decision, whatever the university decides to do is irrelevant. They're not a villain, but if we are weak, they may pounce. Our sense of place will be maintained and restored as we can purchase rentals, which are escalating, I might add, and restore them to family-owned dwellings. This property does not allow the development of single homes or condos because the cost of the land does not support it. The conditional agreement that they have arrived at protects the Flom house, keeps it until the city decides what to do with the house. Traffic has been mentioned. Traffic is not a deal breaker, as Kent Ralston and his survey revealed. Lodging for that hospital is a neighborly thing to do, and it also adds value. As one of the counselors said, we are surviving, and I believe these are Jim Lane's comments. We are surviving. And then my comment would be that we are not thriving as we might be with the opportunities we have. So our tax rate is currently 11%. Iowa City is 16%. We're not being overtaxed, but that's another issue. $3,000 a year on this property at $500,000, 50% rollback, plus hotel or motel tax when and if it is arrived at would be $280,000. plus. So what could we do with this money? We could buy affordable houses. We can rehab rentals and sell them with the help of Habitat for Humanity and the other organizations that are active in Iowa City, and allow families to purchase with the condition that they remain for a term of years at a reasonable rental rate, so that we build small nuclear families in our community, as they were in 1974 when I first arrived. We would have money to make a down payment or to approach the Swisher Tract, and therein have the trails and all of the amenities that we desire, the nature trail preservation, the stabilization of nearby neighborhoods. So what is best for the community? Well, we need to build a better place, live up to our goals and aspirations of the comprehensive plan. And in my view, and I have thought about this a long, long time, and I know that I will offend some people that, have had faith in me, but I believe, as a lawyer and as a longtime inhabitant, that this is the proper thing to do, and that it is a win-win for us, and that I would vote yes.
Well, I'm rarely going to be the guy who has the last word with this council, but I said quite a bit at our special meeting on August 21st, and I'm going to repeat a few of those ideas, but not a whole lot of them. And I think, but the things that do bear repeating are the fact that being the small town that we are makes every one of these decisions so very personal, because you know every single person in the room. There's nowhere to go to escape. You run into people all the time. There would be nothing easier for me than to say, let the next council do it. Nothing easier. This life for me seems to be one of not taking the easy path. I think that having served on this council for 8 years, having campaigned 4 times and gone out and talked to people, I will tell you that the campaigning is the easy part. The hard part is actually coming up and making hard decisions. And it is not anything that I ever begin to take lightly. As I have sat and served on this council, I was a part of the redesign of the comprehensive plan. I was actually a fairly new resident when we put out the first comprehensive plan. I do think our comprehensive plan still gives us good guidance. As I said in asking Kent Ralston tonight, our plan deliberately doesn't say much about the where, but it focuses a lot about the why, because the why is the important part. And the things that I take out of our comprehensive plan, in the section on future land uses, it says that University Heights is almost entirely developed. Changes in land use patterns are anticipated in the immediate future. Okay, so those are 2 things, if you think about those 2, mean something's got to give. However, the community must decide the most appropriate use of the large parcel, let's talk about the Swisher Tract, as well as several other large residential lots. My guiding principle has been, if we're going to develop somewhere, we are going to develop on single large parcels. That is the use that will make what happens to the rest of town minimized as much as possible. I will admit, I was quite surprised when we first were approached with the idea of a hotel. And I harp and harp and harp that people make up their mind first and then look for a reason why later. So I always try to be open. I will admit my first reaction was no. But the more I looked at it, in the context of what we face as a council, the more I began to think this has some merit. parcel as a commercial entity gives us a much greater return than on any other use from taxation. Throwing a motel with the ability of a hotel motel tax on top of that makes this beyond anything we had ever considered before. Having a hotel, when you look at the traffic analysis from MPOJC that says there is less traffic from this hotel than there is from this One University Place project, and most of that traffic will fall outside of our peak hours. That really makes me think this is something we have to look at and look at carefully. Putting all that together has led me to the point of saying, okay, this could possibly be something we want to do. But what I really start to look at is, what is our plan and what is our vision and what would we do with the revenue? This is all taken from our vision plan. This is our summary vision plan of major projects that this city has identified and would like to accomplish. I'm going to talk about 3 of them, 3 of the 5 big ones. Melrose Avenue streetscape, sidewalk and site lighting, and stormwater management. These are all, I don't want to spend a whole lot of time on this, but if I look at that Melrose Avenue streetscape, we are looking at widening the lower part of Melrose. We are looking at bike lanes. We're looking at improved pedestrian crossings. We're looking at $2 million. Now, we've got grant funding from MPO to defray some of that, but we need to come up with a lot of money. As I said at our special meeting, I don't want to see the vision plan become a rolled up document sitting on a shelf gathering dust. Without looking for revenue to make these things happen, that is easily what could happen. Site lighting talks about, one thing that we heard from the community is we have a lot of dark neighborhoods, which is not a bad thing generally, but when you're talking about very specific, what we don't have is any focused sidewalk lighting. You know, we have street lights over the street. If we had focused sidewalk lighting, it would make traveling around a lot easier, would be an amenity that a lot of people would like. The stormwater management talks about, especially, and this is timely given that we're talking about that as one of our zoning changes, is what can we do to improve our water quality? What can we do in terms of rain boxes at the bottom of Koser, at the bottom of Oak Crest? Things like that, that we can stop runoff, and we can do that. All of these things have major capital costs. I have come to the realization that a single property developed for a high return use with little traffic addition to the community, as well as providing the seed money to begin to work on neighborhood redevelopment, is a good use of this single property. So that's where I've come from. And I do, as I said and I started, what makes it hard is you know who everybody is. And you know that you will run into those people on the street. And Pat, I have utmost respect for Pat Bauer, but there is one statement that he made tonight that I have to disagree with. And he talked about hard feelings because of a zoning vote in December of 2010, but that was a zoning vote made by a council that had been elected 4-1 with One University Place as a major campaign issue. I think that what happens with 2-year terms with this council is you're always running into an impeding election. I still am that jerky teacher that teaches right till the final bell and teaches right till the final day of the term. And I don't see an election being the reason for the council to shut down and to stop making decisions.
We have a motion and a second on the table with second consideration, but our city attorney says,
Yeah, so it's,
we-
if it's the second consideration, then it's the ordinance that the developer's saying won't go. So if you wanna vote on that one, that's your prerogative. If you want to vote on the one that developer says will let them develop a hotel, then it's the first consideration. Again, it's your prerogative if you wanna collapse it to keep it on track or not, whatever you wanna do.
so it was Mike and
Jim and Mike. Jim first,
Um,
Mike second.
who made the earlier motion for second consideration.
Or move to collapse the two for the second.
Do you want to make this, do you want to amend your original motion?
Yes. Why don't we just withdraw the original motion?
Okay. Does anyone object?
No.
No.
I object.
Okay, one objection. Do you object? Okay, we'll go ahead and vote.
On whether to withdraw.
Right, I understand it's to withdraw. Okay, all in favor of withdrawing the second consideration of ordinance 208, say aye.
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 Opposed, say no. Okay, it carries 4-1, is that right?
Right.
Okay, and what would you like to make a motion for now?
I move to collapse the vote, first, second, and third readings on the revised ordinance number.
You said first, second,
And third.
and third? Collapse the vote for first, second, and third reading. Okay, is there a second for that?
I'll second that.
Second by Mike. Okay, discussion.
Steve, let's talk about, I want to talk first about the change. Do I have that right, that this is number 2 in section E, where there's language change? Is that the language change right there?
That's the section that has it, yeah. And the change is this, what's section 2, the second sentence, where it says restrictions may also include the size and type of permitted signage and the hours of operation. It had read of the commercial business or something and outdoor seating areas. And so what's omitted is the commercial business. In other words, as I said earlier, the developer said, well, we have to be open 24/7 as a hotel. That's the only change.
Okay.
In number 2, that's the only change.
That's the only change.
In the whole thing, okay. So, Jerry, you wanted to discuss?
I just like, Mike, would you put up that,
Just a second, let me find it.
last meeting I commented that it was inappropriate to make these important decisions in an ad hoc way and not have a plan behind it and not consider other elements. And Jim came up ahead and he said, well, it's not ad hoc, it's opportunistic. And we're acting opportunistically. And just so, and I didn't want to make a big issue of it then because it was a no-win and it seems to be a no-win anyway here. But what opportunistic means is exploiting chances offered by immediate circumstances without reference to a general plan or moral principle. And it's a very interesting way to do business for the council, opportunistically. Thank you.
Well, I obviously used a poor word. I probably should have just kept it an opportunity, because this is an opportunity that is very beneficial to the city. And so I feel like there's a lot of, we do have a plan. It's a good plan. I think it will move this city forward. As I listened to everyone tonight, it's a pretty general consensus.
And you think the money is the opportunity, and I suggest that running after the money hasn't helped a whole lot of cities.
I would say the money has an impact, but it also, or a number of other items that we need to be working on as a city, that people talk about amenities, and we can provide that with, as Rich Smith talked about, roads. We can really elevate the expectations of what we want to get done within this town.
I think a plan could do that as well as this opportunity if we had the right plan and executed it. We just don't have the imagination or the will to do it.
Well, I would say there are some folks who lack some vision, Jerry. I won't get into all of that because things are changing. This town is changing. We need to recognize that. The university is a help and it's a hindrance, but it makes properties like the Flom property extremely valuable, and we need to look at ways to move that, to help the town move forward also.
I would just again ask that I understand you're well intended. I have no question about that. But the residents who have come forward and asked for more time and asked for more consideration of events which are going to transpire, and they will transpire soon, they're just asking for a little more time and a little more consideration. And everybody's held the zoning commission in this incredible respect here. Sylvia says, they've had 10 meetings over this. Well, yes, they had 10 meetings, and they voted against it, right? Now, it's another oddity that's, the logic just escapes me. Yes, they had 10 meetings. They looked very closely at it. They're a bunch of very smart people, and they said no. There's all kinds of reasons just for respect and dignity in the community to give it more time and let Kent Ralston do his job. Let him see what the scholarship and the research is on motels impacting communities. The developer has said he's not going anywhere. He's a responsible party. He's a good developer. Why not just take 6 months, a moment, and let healing continue and let us see where things go with the university and others and vote on it then.
Any other discussion? Is council ready to vote on collapsing the first, second, and third reading? Okay, roll call vote.
Maher,
Yes.
Lane,
Yes.
Casada,
Aye.
Zimmerman,
Nope.
Haverkamp,
Aye.
carried 4-1.
Okay, now, so now we have the first, second, and third consideration of ordinance number 208. Is that how you say it? Before you.
First, second, and third? First and second. First, second, and third.
They collapsed 1, 2, and 3. So
Stick your
that's
fin-
before you.
Yeah. Let's stick our fingers in a lot of people's eyes right now and do that, yeah. I think I am very sorry, Mr. Stiltner, for calling you a liar.
Next.
As a citizen, I want to say that collapsing the municipal codes should be taken very seriously when you vote on it finally. You can always vote again next time.
Is there a motion on the table?
I move adoption of ordinance 208. Is that what we're doing now?
Yes.
Thank you. Yes.
Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, a motion by Mike Haverkamp, second by Jim Lane. And this is the first, second, and third consideration of ordinance number 208.
And the reason we're doing this is just to catch up that language, right?
No.
Oh, I understand the voting consequences. I'm just, because today is,
No.
Collapse all 3 votes.
council is speaking now. Please don't interrupt. Thank you.
We're collapsing because we made there's that change for the
Yes.
language,
Right.
which means 1 and 2. Fine. That was done last month.
Right.
This month, we're doing 2 and 3, but for that revised
Right.
language. Fine. So, okay, I'm ready to vote.
That's good.
Roll call vote.
Lane,
Yes.
Casada,
Yes.
Zimmerman,
Nope.
Haverkamp,
Yes.
Maher,
Yes.
carried.
Okay, we're going to have to look at this agenda quite aggressively here because of the late hour. And I know that several people who wanted to talk about the sidewalk have left. And they wanted that moved up, so I'd like some assistance. I mean, I know we have to go through some of these resolutions tonight. I mean, let's think about it as we're going through some of them, that maybe we want a special meeting to.
I say let's do a special meeting, sure.
We need to do these
But there's a
street
few things we
financial
need to
report.
do.
Yeah,
But I
yeah,
think
they're
in the late hour, it's hard to keep thinking about some important issues that are on the agenda. And the ones I see are the contract for Chris Lyon.
Why don't we just do that quickly and get it done so we can get
Right.
that behind us?
Okay, we're going to go to that. I agree. Consideration of Resolution 1736, authorizing the mayor to sign and the clerk to attest to an employment agreement with Chris Lyon to serve as chief of police for the city of University Heights. And
Move
the
adoption of
police committee-
resolution
oh,
1736.
yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
I second it.
Okay, motion by Mike, second by Jerry. Okay, the police committee and I met, and we met with Chris Lyon, and we had Steve write up some of our thoughts that are presented before you. There was added a thing about severance pay, and I'm just saying that was added, but you can discuss it if you want it in there or not, or you can accept it as is. I know you had chance to review it, right, today?
I move to approve.
Well, we already.
We
already
have.
Mike,
Oh.
Okay.
we have that done.
Okay, all right, then.
So,
Yeah, I suggest, Chris had such great community support. It's, he's acted as a
So we
superb
vote?
professional, and I think he deserves that term.
okay,
That's fine.
ready to vote?
Agree with that. Mm-hmm.
Okay, roll call vote.
Haverkamp,
Aye.
Maher,
Aye.
Lane,
Aye.
Casada,
Aye.
Zimmerman,
Aye.
carried.
Okay, so Sylvia will move yours to a special meeting, and we have, under Steve, we have
We can,
Need to do
consideration of resolution 1737. And this is the owners of 1250 Melrose for an exception pursuant to ordinance 136-4 to the requirement that portable toilets be located so they are not visible from city streets. Did he stay?
I think Nick might have. Oh, there he is.
you are.
Yep.
You moved over there. Well, thank you for coming, Nick. And I just asked Nick, he sent a very nice letter to council, and I asked him to summarize it.
Be very brief. Nick Herbold, 1250 Melrose. So I have an agreement with Porto Johnny. They deliver and pick up the porta potty. So the pickup is the day before the game. The drop off is the day before the game. The pickup is the day after the game. So I'm here initially asking for an exception. I've laid out in the materials that I think my lot is situated in such a way that makes it so that I would not be able to hide it. But I am very committed to having it taken away, as I've just discussed. I understand there's a history behind the ordinance going back and forth between allowing them and then not allowing them, and I'm not fully aware of the history except for what the mayor has told me, but I entertain any questions about the situation.
I move adoption of resolution 1737.
Okay, motion by Mike. Is there a second?
I second.
Second by Sylvia. I think possibly if the council would go ahead with just the exception and that we talk about this at a special meeting in
Yeah.
more detail would
Yeah.
be good.
It's like I said to Mrs. Levy, we'd rather have them than not have them. So,
Okay. And is that okay with you, Nick? I just want to, thank you. Okay, roll call vote.
Maher.
Aye.
Lane.
Aye.
Casada.
Aye.
Zimmerman.
Aye.
Haverkamp.
aye.
Carried.
Okay, now we'll go to Resolution 1738.
Which is the adoption of the annual city street financial report. So I move adoption.
I second it.
Okay, a motion by Jim, second by Jerry. Discussion. I think it's out there. Roll call vote.
Lane.
Aye.
Casada.
Aye.
Zimmerman.
Aye.
Haverkamp.
Aye.
Maher.
Aye.
Carried.
Then, let's see, we can cover some of this, right? The chief reported a special meeting, don't you think?
Mm-hmm.
Did I
Uh,
forget the warrant?
You can put all my stuff on.
Yeah.
Warrants.
Oh, the warrants. Oh, my goodness. We got to pay the bills. I didn't star that. Okay, the warrants are before you. Lori sent them again. Oh, you have some more? Okay, go ahead and tell us. Okay. So those are the additions. Are there any other additions? Is there any objection to paying the bills? Hearing none, the bills will be paid by unanimous consent. And then we'll go down to, streets and sidewalks. We'll talk about,
Pay application number 1.
yeah, we'll talk about that at special meeting because the people will want to come back and speak to that.
No, we need
Which
the
one?
pay application.
The pay application.
The pay
Yeah,
application.
go ahead.
It was in
It was-
like it usually is, but the streets project, the contractor is substantially complete, so they've submitted their pay app, and we've reviewed it and submitted it to you and agree with the quantities, so we recommend it.
Okay, and then we'll go to, so we have to discuss a special meeting date.
Okay.
Let me get out my calendar, but does Thursday work for anyone? This Thursday? Is that,
I'm leaving tomorrow and will not be back until the 25th.
okay?
But you could
We
call.
can always, you could call in, or we could have a meeting without you, or,
Yeah, I would not promise I could call in. This is
okay.
there's a lot of activities on this trip, so.
Oh, you're on a ship.
No, I'm not driving, but
Oh. I got you. Okay,
Thursday's Dine Out for Education. Are you on that? Are you one now, Jerry, or no?
No.
Brand new one? Okay.
okay, so you're busy.
No, I mean, I can do it. How
does that work
I'll
with
bring some
everyone?
food.
That would be.
Thursday?
Yeah, that works.
This Thursday is tough for me.
It's tough. Okay, maybe we can try sometime next week better?
Yeah, maybe.
Like maybe
Like-
No.
Monday?
I was just going to say Monday's probably better for you,
Monday's
isn't it,
probably your
Jerry?
best day,
Well, it's, yeah. Monday.
or a good day. Okay,
Monday okay for you, Dottie?
I think I have something, but I'm not sure what it is.
okay, what would that Monday be?
That's the
18th.
18th.
18th. Okay, well, we're saying 7 o'clock Monday on the 18th, unless you want to change. I think it's good to be consistent with the time,
Mm-hmm.
and then that gives a little more time for the public also
Okay.
to come back. And so we're going to say Monday, the 18th at 7 p.m.
Okay.
And then,
I may not be able to make it.
We can move
We'll
time
have
if
to
we
see.
can
I
move the
think I
time
have
on
something
Monday if we need to.
okay, well, get back to me real soon.
Yeah, 'cause I don't.
And then I'll send an email to the council, okay?
This week would work better for me.
And So did we vote on everything we needed to?
Except for going into.
Close.
Yeah.
Yep.
I
we
know.
We need to authorize this
Yep.
1,500. or we do
No.
that in closed session?
That's
After
that's what will come
after
out of it.
closed session.
Fine.
Are we postponing the engineer
Yeah.
discussion?
Yes,
Okay.
Yeah.
we're going to do that at special meeting. And
So we go into closed session now.
yeah, so recommended by the city attorney to meet in closed session.
I move we move into closed session pursuant to Iowa Code Section 21.5 Sub 1C.
Okay, is there a second? And
Oh, and where the disclosure would be likely to discuss matters of litigation where the disclosure would be likely to prejudice or disadvantage the position of the city. And pursuant to code section 21.51 HC, to avoid disclosure of specific law enforcement matters which, if disclosed, would facilitate disregard of requirements imposed by law.
is there a second?
Second.
Jim, yes.
Roll call vote.
Haverkamp.
Aye.
Maher. Lane.
Aye.
Casada.
Aye.
Zimmerman. Carried.
Okay.
Your Honor, are you foregoing the rest of the public input?
Yeah, we're going to have a special meeting, and then we'll have it. And right now, it's Monday, the 18th, at 7 p.m., and then we'll, so that we won't short.
Okay.
No, we're going to come back to open session, and then we're very close. We just have to, council has to make another decision. Okay, so council is back and walking slowly over here. So, are you ready, Brad? We will now reconvene to open session and consideration of Resolution 1740.
I move it.
Authorizing payment of $1,500 for a deductible on its liability insurance policy and full and complete settlement of pending litigation.
Move adoption of resolution 1740.
I'll second.
Motion by Mike, second by Dottie. Roll call vote.
Haverkamp.
Aye.
Maher. Lane.
Aye.
Casada.
Aye.
Zimmerman. Carried.
Is there any objection to adjournment? Hearing none, the meeting's adjourned by unanimous consent. Thank you. We'll see you Monday on the 18th at 7 p.m.
Okay.